Thank you very kindly. It's indeed a pleasure to return here again to share these moments and time with you. And of course to apologize for not being able to make it last year. But unfortunately it sort of burnt myself out a bit, particularly in terms of my speaking voice, so I had to sort of take a rest for a while. And so it's good to sort of kick off my return out here to the lecture circuit speaking with you today. I was told that my topic would be the psychology of African liberation, and I won't pretend to speak to that very fully, but certainly I will try to make a contribution. And I think the title is apt in that it's very important that we get to the psychology and what we call the metaphysics of liberation before sometimes we get into the real activities of liberation. In other words, it's important that we get to know the guiding concepts, values, goals, and other important psychological, philosophical, and ideological factors that contribute to what we are trying to accomplish in the world itself. Otherwise, we will find ourselves reacting and acting in terms of emotions. We will find ourselves engaged in rebellion and reform instead of revolution, which is what we need to engage in most of all. Genuine revolution must be preceded by then what we call the metaphysical revolution. That is a change in values, a change in perceptions, a change in what we see as the goals of life and the reasons for living. Then this is followed by the actual practical revolution. And often I think in the past we have reacted more so than thought out exactly what we are trying to accomplish as a people. And often then at the end of our reactions, we have ended up with some results with which we don't quite know what to do. I think a part of this psychology of liberation must, of course, involve what I may call a bit of self-knowledge, a bit of getting to know who we are and what we are and why we are. It involves us looking very deeply into ourselves and looking ourselves in the eyes and talking truth to ourselves, regardless as to whether that truth is painful or not. We must face the fact that we as a people, and I'll put it this way, let me put it this way, I often say it this way and I'll say it again. In order for us to be in the position we're in as peoples, we have to be crazy. We have to be out of our minds. We have to be in a state of deception and off our centers. It is not possible for the European, who is about 10% of the world's population, to rule over the other 90% of the world's population unless that 90% is crazy and out of its mind. It is not possible for the European who inhabits lands that are not wealthy in their natural resources, and yet to be seen as the world's wealthiest people, and our peoples who inhabit the lands with abundant natural resources to be seen as the world's poorest people. For us to be in that position unless we are out of our minds as people. In other words, then, being crazy and being out of our minds, being maladjusted, whatever word you want to call it, is a political necessity for the European system to survive. It could not survive otherwise. And we must recognize that as the foundation of our situation, the necessity of the European to keep us out of our minds and to keep us maladjusted as a people. Therefore, the liberation of African man and the liberation of the world in general essentially involves the liberation from this state of craziness that we've been put into, and recognizing it and determining how we can escape it. For once we escape this state of mind that has been imposed upon us by political and other means, we then will begin to achieve what I call our liberation. I like to use as a base for what I'm going to talk about here tonight a section of the textbook I use in my course called General Psychology, an introduction to general psychology. I introduce my course often by telling my students that the book that you are going to use for this course, of course, has not been designed for you. It's not designed with you in mind. And it's not designed then to liberate you. Of course, as Pablo Freire says, the idea of the oppressor giving the oppressed a liberating education is a contradiction in terms. However, I use the book to a good extent, first of all, because there's not a good third world psychology available. And that is a project I hope some of us will undertake when a general psychology book is written for our people. But I use this general psychology to demonstrate, though, to my students, how with the right interpretation that that book can reveal in many, many ways the means by which we are held in bondage as a people, and to illustrate the arrogance of our oppressors, in that in a way they can put right before our faces the very means by which people are manipulated and the very means by which people are held into bondage, and yet expect us not to be able to see it. It shows you then what great deal of confidence they have in their handiwork. That is, they have the confidence that they have so trained our minds that they can literally then put the secrets of how people are manipulated and how people are created and structured, and yet we will not see it. And to a great extent, that has been true. So to a good extent, what I do when I look at that textbook then is to work with it on the level that is presented and then try to move it beyond that level to show how then we could use this so-called psychology to our own ends. One of the sections of the textbook that interests me a great deal is the section that tries to differentiate the so-called normal individual from the abnormal individual, the so-called adjusted individual from the maladjusted individual. And it becomes interesting to note that in many psychology books, in fact practically all of them, that the European generally writes on the individual level. Often the first deception that many of our students undergo is the belief that a general psychology course is essentially concerned with the individual mind. Because often the political context, the social context, the historical context, and so forth, are left out. So that the student then is left to believe that what he's dealing with is something that is non-political in its basic nature, and something that is the result of the individual's own problems and the individual's own characteristics, and that the society and the political system has little or nothing to do with it. Of course, this is the first type of brainwashing our students receive in the colleges and universities of this country and in the secondary schools. I often then admonish them to, when you read this material, elevate it into the group level, elevate it onto the national level and onto the international level. And then you will begin to see how it applies not only to you as an individual, but is to you as a people, as a nation, and applies in the world situation in general. This textbook then provided a list of things which it said would indicate that the normal person has more of than the abnormal person. And I'll go down this list. One of the first things it lists is that the normal individual has an efficient perception of reality. Normal individuals are fairly realistic in appraising their reactions and capabilities and in interpreting what is going on in the world around them. They do not consistently misperceive what others say and do. They do not consistently over-evaluate their abilities and tackle more than they can accomplish, or underestimate their abilities and shy away from difficult tasks. I must say this is from the general psychology book, Introduction to Psychology by Atkinson and Atkinson. An efficient perception of reality. In other words, what we're saying here then is that the normal individual deals with reality. And essentially, the abnormal individual is one who wrestles and deals with non-reality. At the center of almost any psychological maladjustment, psychological problem, is the attempt of the individual to escape reality or to avoid reality in some form or another. You can imagine for a moment how important it is for us to have a perception of reality, an efficient one, the ability to really perceive what is going on and to sense what is going on. Imagine for a moment that you've lost your sight and see in what way that influences your ability to deal with reality. Imagine then a little later you lose your hearing. Then you lose your feeling. You lose your taste. You lose your smell. You lose your ability to feel your own body. How then can you cope with reality? Can you really be human, having lost all of your senses? You would literally have to be taken care of and guided by someone else. A person then who could not feel his body, could not see, could not hear, could not taste, is an individual, of course, who by no means is going to be able to cope efficiently with reality, except perhaps through the very needed help of others. In a sense, then, when we look at our situation in this country and in the world in general, we, to a good extent, have been made inefficient in our perception of reality by the European. Let's look again. A lot of people think that in order to see, all you have to do is open your eyes. But that's not what seeing is about. To a good extent, seeing is about looking. In a sense, you have to look to see. In other words, seeing is something directed by the brain itself. And it is not just important that you have 20/20 vision. In fact, it doesn't matter how acute your vision is, unless that vision is directed by an organized, systematic plan. Unless it is directed in terms of some purpose, unless it is organized by the brain, in a sense then you can be blind to reality with your eyes wide open. Take the freshman student in biology, or the student who hasn't looked through a microscope before. Compare that student, even though he might could see better than his professor. Compare what that student might see when he looks through that microscope for the first time and what his professor sees. Even though his eyes may be better, for him, when he looks through that microscope, he might just see a bit of gray matter there, a few outlines. Or like the student who looks at an X-ray, and all he sees are shadows. But compare that then to the trained biologist, who can see many more things than the untrained student, or the radiologist, who can look at the X-ray and see many more things than the untrained student. Even though the student's eyes may be better, and they may be wide open and quite alert, if those eyes are not directed by the brain itself, if those eyes are not directed by a trained and experienced brain, then that student is literally blind to certain aspects of reality, even though the reality is staring him right in the face. Take the Eskimo, who may look at snow and see a dozen different grades of snow and more snow. Of course, he has to see it because his life depends upon it. Take the average American, who may know only one or two. And you're sitting there looking at the snow, and the Eskimo is showing you all the different grades, and you're saying, well, I don't see it. I can't see it. And it will take years of experience for you to see it. Or take the skilled hunter who sees tracks or sees some signs of the prey moving in certain directions, or who can smell or sense something when the unexperienced hunter cannot see or smell or follow through. What I'm trying to get at here then is the idea that to see involves more than just opening the eyes and exposing the retina to the environment. It means then, in a sense, the mind sees through the eyes and directs the eyes as what to see. We, in hypnosis, we deal with something that we call sometimes negative hallucinations. That is, getting people, let's look at the other type of hallucination first, say the positive hallucination. The positive hallucination, of course, is getting people to see what is actually not there. To see things that are actually not present in reality. And of course, some of you probably have seen those kinds of hypnotic tricks, where you tell the hypnotic patient or the client that he has a rabbit in his lap, and of course there's nothing there, and he then proceeds to pet it and play with it, even though it's not there. This is what we call a positive hallucination. You can also produce a negative hallucination. You can tell the hypnotized subject that an object which is right before his face is not there. And he will see everything except that particular object that you've directed him not to see. You see this sometimes in certain forms of schizophrenia, for instance. Some types of schizophrenics can look and see everything on this podium here, except perhaps this tape, even though it's right there before their eyes. Sometimes it's fascinating when you look at people who are so-called mentally disturbed, particularly the schizophrenic, because you can see the enormous powers of the human mind. And in this instance, then, you have a mind that for some reason or other is instructing that patient not to see a particular object right before his face. And yet, he's seeing all of the other objects around it very, very clearly. So what we're trying to talk about here then is that if your mind and your brain is inefficiently programmed, then that inefficient program will misdirect your eyes, will misdirect your senses, will create for you then a reality that is, in a sense, unreal. It will mean then, since you are missing reality and missing parts of that reality, you cannot efficiently cope with it. To a good extent then, when we look at the history of the African man in relationship to the European, we see a man whose reality has been created for him, whose mind and brain has been created in such a way that even the most obvious things in reality are overlooked and not seen. And this is often done through what we call this so-called education. Remember, I alluded to the idea of trained eyes, experienced eyes, which means that an individual's mind has been created so that the eyes can find what that individual is looking for. What makes you think then that the European who trains your mind is going to train your mind to see reality in such a way that it will overthrow his dominance over you as a people? How do you expect to see reality from a people who write your history in such a way that you don't even see yourself there? So when you look at history, you're not there. You look at American history, you're not there. You look at world history, you're not there. You look at anthropology, you're not there. And if you are there, you're there as a primitive, Stone Age kind of people, never having written anything or contributed anything. You look at economics, and you're not there except perhaps as a commodity in and of itself. You look at mathematics, and you're not there. You look at every discipline, and you do not see yourself. What kind of reality then can we be looking at as a people when our minds have been trained in such a way that we have literally negative hallucinations as well as positive hallucinations? It's amazing then that when we look at these disciplines where we don't see ourselves, so many of us call this kind of education in these disciplines a good education. It's an amazing kind of things. You've had a people who have hung you, lynched you, degraded you, enslaved you, killed Indians, colonized people all over the world, killed millions and millions and millions of people, exploited people, destroyed people, polluted the earth. Have they done such a job on the earth until you begin to wonder if they come from the same planet? You begin to wonder if these people are not a type of infection, a virus whose purpose it is to destroy the health of the world itself. And as we see them now beginning to destroy the earth and now getting ready to move their destructive natures into the cosmos itself, they've already made it to the moon and are now preparing to infect the whole of the universe. How can you then, as a people, assume that the people who've done all of these kinds of things to us as a people can give us a vision of reality? How can we accept their description of reality as the one with which we are going to guide our own behavior? How can we believe a people whose very lives depends upon our continuing domination? And yet there are those among us who seem to want to believe this, who seem to want to push their children under the instructorship of these people, who seem to want their people to resemble these people in some fashion, who have the nerve to see these people as representing some kind of civilization. These people may represent a culture, but not a civilization, particularly if we're going to look at the word civil in the sense that it is normally used. We saw this thing here. In fact, last week I remarked, somebody had a conference here somewhere, and they voted against, or they condemned, what do we call it? Terrorism. In fact, I saw Reagan, someone proposed that the meeting between Reagan and Gorbachev would involve a discussion of terrorism. And I found that so amusing. In fact, I find the newspapers and the TV, particularly the news, very, very amusing. You know, they're real jokes to watch. And in a way, you're looking at these guys and they're going to talk about terrorism. And yet, here are the world's two greatest terrorists sitting in conference. Two people in the world who have the world wondering, when is the end going to come? When is one of them going to go off and drop a bomb that is going to destroy the life of man and perhaps life on earth, period? The very fact that they are seen as powerful people, the very fact that the world sat in intense attention when they met, is symbolic of the fact that they are holding the world in a state of terror. And that we are frightened that they may, for some reason or other, let loose the great power that they have under their hands. And yet they have nerve enough to talk about terrorism as if it belongs to another people. And yet these are the people many of us want to claim that we want our children to be just like. These are the people we want our children to share a piece of the pie with. And yet these are the peoples whose very weapons are weapons of death. These are the people who represent death in the world. One of the things I recognized when I went through the graduate schools, and that struck me again and again and again, and that was this idea that these people are dead. They're not alive. And dead people are deadly. What kind of civilization can it be when the more civilized you become, the more deadly you become? How can you justify that as civilization? We as a people then have to recognize that there must be an alternative to this kind of being. That the idea of our people is not to share equality with these people, because the system that they represent is one that in and of itself should be rejected. What kind of education, and the brother wonders sometimes why don't want to be called doctor, or I don't want to be called this and that. In a sense, I think if we think about it very closely, we should be very hesitant about giving ourselves those titles that are conferred upon us by these other people and what they so-called represent. Because we have to recognize that the educated individual is the craziest of all individuals. That the educated individual is the most dangerous of all individuals. When this world comes to its end, it will not be brought to an end by the muggers on the streets, ladies and gentlemen. It will not be brought to an end by the drug addicts, by the street prostitutes, by the youth gangs. It's going to be brought to an end by people with PhD degrees. It's going to be brought to an end by people who studied physics and mathematics, who spent 15 and 20 and 30 years in school. It's going to be brought to an end by people who live in nice clipped lawns, with houses on the corner, with neat hedges, two-car garages, nice little well-spoken children, the people who send their kids to private school. And one morning they'll go off to work and give their wives a nice little bourgeois kiss. And then they'll go down and sit in front of the console of their computer and proceed to blow themselves up along with the rest of the world. What kind of education is it that leads to these kind of people, ladies and gentlemen? These people are being educated into madness. A real Afrocentric education would not educate people in such a way that they then develop tools of death and destruction, that they become the end point of a destructive procedure. When you must recognize then that these very people you bow and dip to and defer to, these very so-called experts, are the people who are going to take you directly to hell. Because you are responding to them not in terms of truth, not in terms of what they're really saying, but in terms of their symbols of authority. And because they lay these symbols of authority on you, they can tell you any kind of nonsense, and you're ready to believe it. And because they threaten you and intimidate you with their degrees and with their so-called learning, you're not willing to follow your own common sense and question what they have to say and where they're going and what they're doing. And you don't have sense enough then to say, wait a minute, if you are so well educated, if you are so liberal, if you are so perceptive, if you are so concerned, why are you making weapons of death that will destroy you, your children, and the futures of mankind? Why are you then living in the laps of luxury, having far more wealth and money than you could ever use, while millions and millions of my people are starving and dying the world over? So we must recognize then that these kind of people cannot lay a correct perception of reality upon us as a people. And we must recognize that the very educated among them are the very ones who are responsible to a great degree for creating the distorted reality we face today. We have to recognize that knowledge in and of itself does not represent the salvation of mankind. You saw this in the book of Genesis, didn't you? where Adam and Eve were told to stay away from the tree of knowledge. And the old devil there was telling them what? Eat of it. You shall be as gods. He's just telling you that. If you get a hold of this fruit, you'll be able to know good and evil, and you'll see right and wrong. You can see just as good as God sees, and in a sense, you will become God yourself. And they ate of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And from this point on, we see that knowledge was not the salvation of man. And you can see it today in the Caucasian who believes that the more knowledge he gets, the more somehow he's going to be able to be godlike. He thinks that as he gets to know more about DNA, he's going to be able to create life, and perhaps he will to a degree. But have you also noticed that the more knowledge he's gotten, the more of a danger he's become to the world? And that the more he's gotten to know about the atoms and the so-called foundations of the world, the more he has also gotten to know about how to create death and destruction. So consequently, he is in a race with himself, thinking that knowledge will save him, when all it does in most instances is push him closer and closer to the end of his life on earth. And so the Russians feel as if they knew a little more about the United States, a little more than the United States, then they would be able to defend themselves against the warlike nature of this country. And therefore they learn a little more and build a more dangerous weapon. And the United States then feels if it knows a little more than the Russians know, he will defend himself against their weapon. And they move a little closer to death and destruction. Because, ladies and gentlemen, it is a people who have been educated in terms of knowledge, but not in terms of the spirit, not in terms of the heart, and not in terms of the soul. It is a knowledge that is dead and materialistic, and creates a dead and materialistic people. And its end point then is death and destruction. So to gain all of this knowledge and yet to lose our souls, then is what this European education is all about. And yet we as a people want our children to be just like them, to get this good education. Even the so-called religion they've laid upon us is also part of the false reality we live in. I often wonder how many real Christians could actually read the history of the Christian religion. If you're a Christian out there and you really want to test your faith, after you get through reading the Bible, read the history of the Christian religion. Read the history of the popes. Read the history of the wars and death born in the name of so-called God. Read the history of a priest on one side praying that his army will chop to pieces the army on the other side, with the priest praying on the other side that his army chops the other one to pieces. Read the history of these people, of the priests who enslaved your own people. Read the history of the popes who gave their people permission to enslave us and to put us away. How then can you expect this people to give you an efficient perception of reality? Then we must recognize then that our very first problem as a people is that of perceiving reality for what it is and dealing with it for what it is. For if you do not deal with reality for what it is, then you can only be dealing with fantasies and hallucinations and illusions. And if you deal with fantasies, hallucinations, and illusions, then you will stumble about as a blind people and will be unable to solve the problems that confront us. One of the major reasons then we have such difficulty in solving the problems that confront us as a people and in dealing with our own liberation is because we are operating from a false reality. You must recognize that the European is a devil. And a devil operates on the basis of lies. The major characteristic of the devil is deception and controlling people in terms of deception. As I've told you before, you cannot have 10% of the world's population controlling the other 90% of the world population and not have that population locked up in concentration camps and have that population with guns on it and forcing it to be, unless that population is deceived and operates in terms of a false consciousness. And therefore lying and deception must be a characteristic of the European in order to maintain the world as it is today. And therefore we people, and you're ready to believe what they tell you. It implies a split in the mind, a schizophrenic approach to reality. And there's no wonder then the people who have this way of thinking are people who have a hell of a time getting out of the situation they're in. The other aspect that's mentioned here is the aspect of self-knowledge. He goes on to say, well-adjusted people have some awareness of their own motives and feelings. Although none of us can fully understand our feelings of behavior, normal people do not hide important feelings and motives from themselves. They have more self-awareness than individuals who are diagnosed as mentally ill. Self-knowledge. Self-knowledge. Knowing the self. When we talk about a knowledge of reality, we're not only talking about a knowledge of that reality that lies outside of your body. We are also talking about the knowledge of reality that is inside your body and in your mind as well. So consequently then, a perception of reality means a perception both of external and internal reality. And it means then, if we need to know what is going on the outside, to be able to see, taste, smell, feel what is on the outside, then we need equally as well to be able to know what is going on the inside. If not knowing, if not being able to perceive what is going on in the outside reality cripples us, makes us stumble over reality, makes us inefficient in coping with that reality, then not knowing ourselves also creates the same kind of problem. Hence we fall over our own minds, our own sense of self, and our own being. We have to recognize when we looked at the African man in slavery that the African could not be an African and a slave at the same time. You can't be an African and a slave at the same time. You cannot be a real black African person and be under the control of the European at the same time. Therefore, the slave master recognized this right away. And consequently, he set to work immediately to remove the African nature from the African person. Which means then if he removed the African nature, he took away the self-knowledge necessary for that individual to define himself. He took away the values, took away the cultural mores and ethics, the cultural way of perceiving and dealing with reality. He took away then the self-definition. That is why, of course, we don't find ourselves in history. That is why the anthropology distorts the perception of the African. That is why economics is not adequately explained in terms, in relationship to our people. That is why the religion is distorted and used against us. We've told you many times that you have to recognize that the Europeans' position depends upon the subordination of the African peoples. And consequently, every institution in the European system has as its center the maintaining of the status quo. That is why I've often said everything has to be reversed when it comes to the African person. When you send your children to school, they must be made dumb in the same school that the white child is made smart in. Everything must be turned backwards. Welfare must keep you poor, we've said. Religion must send you to hell. And it is. Very much so. Some of you, if you took the time to study some of the people who founded your denominations, if you didn't know that they were the founder of your denomination, you'd swear they were crazy. And they were. Many of them were. Suffering from total hallucinations. And yet being able to convince millions of people that their hallucinations were for real. So as you follow them, you're going to follow them right into hell. Because many of them started out with very corrupt reasons and very corrupt purposes. They've been whitewashed over time, but the record is quite clear in many of them. So what we must have then in the system then is one where each institution works backwards. The school system then must make us ignorant. The church must send us to hell. The welfare and the economic system must keep us poor. The correction system must turn us into criminals. The psychiatric system must keep us crazy. And the whole business, as you look at the institution after institution, you will see it does not work for our people. It means then that these institutions are dedicated to removing self-knowledge as a part of our personalities as a people. It means then that a new personality has to have been installed in the African body. And this is a part of the brainwashing process. The first aspect of the brainwashing process is to remove the individual's original identity, to degrade that original identity, to make the individual reject that original identity, and then, in a sense, to hand him a new identity, and to put in his place a new personality. Hence, I've said many times, the African man as we see him today is a created man, is a Frankenstein creation of the European. A man, we talk in psychology about conditioning, how you condition a rat, or how you condition a dog, and you put them, for instance, you put that rat in a box, and you determine when it's going to get fed, and for what reason it's going to get fed, and you train it that it has to perform a particular behavior in order to get fed or to get water, so that in the end this rat then acquires what we call a new behavior. It acquires a new way of dealing with the world. as a result of being placed in those particular conditions. So we look at conditioning as learning, but note also conditioning means to have to live under certain conditions. And one thing that the human brain is about is that it's essentially a learning instrument. That is why we come into the world not pre-wired as lower animals, but the brain is more like a computer, so that it programs its environment and takes in its environment and then begins to orient the person's behavior in terms of that program. In a sense then, ladies and gentlemen, we not only live in an environment, but what? The environment lives in us. You not only then live under certain conditions, but the conditions live in you as a people. That rat then, as a result of being put in that condition of the Skinner box, itself becomes conditioned. And you can tell that it has been in the box by looking at its behavior, which means that the condition now has inculcated itself into the very brains of that rat, and it comes out into its very behavior. When you let then another people determine the conditions under which you must live as a people, then those people are creating you the same way the rat's behavior is created by the conditions under which it must live. I tell my students then, when you look at the Skinner experiment, the rat in the box, you must not look at it just the way it's described in the book. You see, the book will say, well, you know, the rat is in the box, and if it pushes the lever, then the pellet of food falls down and it eats the food. And after a while, it learns the association between pushing the lever down and getting the food. Hence, it is conditioned. And they play all kinds of games with that. And see, a good old black student, he comes in and he learns all of that, man. And he figures he's equally educated with the white boy. Oh, man, I know this conditioning. He may even come out Phi Beta Kappa. First in his class. Stupid, though. Stupid. Stupid. Very stupid. Very stupid. In fact, his very Phi Beta Kappa kid is going to make him stupid, because he's going to get pride out of it. And you're not going to be able to tell him anything. Why, I got my doctorate from Harvard. You're going to tell me? But ladies and gentlemen, if that class did not tell him that he is the rat, he's been miseducated. That the relationship between the rat in that box and the experimenter is not merely an experiment in conditioning, it also represents a political situation. And it represents a set of power relationships. And that the rat is created more through the power relationships than it is through the so-called experiment. But it isn't described this way in the general psychology text. The experimenter has what? Power. And the rat is relatively what? Powerless. And therefore the experimenter can put this powerless rat into this condition. Because if the rat had power, he would dare him to do it. And say, you're not going to put me in that box. I'll put you in the box, but you're not going to put me in the box. But the rat, having not that power, is not able to do it. And now the experimenter uses his power. I'll feed you when you do this. I'll send an electric shock through you when you do that. When I turn this light on, you eat. When I turn it off, you don't. And then so if that student doesn't learn that, he's been miseducated. I don't care what an A he makes in the course. He's been made stupid by the very education. If he's not told then and asked the question, let's look at Harlem and let's look at the other ghettos of the world, and these include whole nations. Who's feeding you? Where do you get your food from? Don't you know you're locked in here? And if someone ran a blockade around your community today, you'd literally starve to death. Who's bringing the waters into your community and into your house? The oil, the gas, the lights, the jobs. And when you look at it, you see again a what? Power relationship. And do you think these people who control these essential things are going to be foolish enough to manipulate them in a way such that you will not be controlled in the sense that they want you to be controlled as a people? That they are not going to use this power to create into us a type of personality that is compatible with their own system and with their status quo? You would do it if you had the power. And of course, in a sense, this is the way reality works. And this is the way the people have worked this. And the idea then that you will let another group of people have this much power and control over the very vital resources of the world and over the very vital things for life itself means, in a sense then, that we are letting them have control to a great extent over our personality, and in a sense they have created this personality. And therefore what they have done is introjected into us the kind of personality that is suitable to their continuing domination of the world itself. And an essential part of removing, an essential part of creating that personality is to remove the knowledge of ourselves as people. When you don't know your history, you don't know yourself. And I mean that personally. For you as an individual are the end point of the history of your people. What our people have been through is represented in your behavior. You know, you hear some of us, some foolish among us, well, that was 300 years ago. That was so many years ago. Well, it got nothing to do with today. You want to talk about that old slavery? We should put that behind us. In other words, you have some people who are crying out for amnesia. Let us forget all about that. But ladies and gentlemen, the human being does not operate, the human mind does not operate in that fashion. One of the fascinating things about the human mind is particularly when we talk about the concept of the unconscious, is the fact that your body and your mind can be operated by ideas which you yourself do not even know that you have. And that's a fascinating thing about the human mind, isn't it? That there can be wishes and ideas and values and impulses inside your mind, and as far as you are concerned, they are not there at all, and yet those impulses and ideas are directing your behavior. It's a very peculiar thing about human beings. And what am I saying here then? Simply because you may not know something about yourself, and simply because you think that something in your personality does not exist, does not mean that it does not exist, and does not mean that it is not there affecting your behavior. The black child at this very moment, even though it may know nothing about the slave experience of black people, is still influenced by that experience. The lack of knowledge about our experience of people then does not exempt that experience from operating in our behavior. The experience then of our people becomes apparent when we look at the behavior of our people, even though we may not know the history of the influences that are working on us. The idea that you have not read slave history and dealt with slave history does not mean that you have escaped having a slave mentality. That in fact, it makes the slave mentality operate more forcefully and unimpeded in the personality. And that is why, of course, this self-knowledge had to be removed from our people. It becomes interesting to note then what we call the multiple personality, which is, when you look at them, it's a very interesting phenomenon. You know, some of you saw Three Faces of Eve, right? That movie. And some of you saw Sybil, the girl with 17 personalities or 18, whatever. And yet you can see that those personalities existed, many of them independent of each other. The interesting thing we found out about personality lately is the fact that these personalities not only take over the mind of the individual, but they really take over the body of the individual as well. They take over the body to such an extent that if you give each personality an EEG examination, each one will show distinct differences. In other words, then, a person who has more than one personality, when you test their brainwave patterns, it will be as if you're dealing with individuals with different brains. Quite a fundamental thing we're saying here. In other words, each personality carries with it a characteristic brain. Even though it's using the same brain, it's a different brain. If you give each personality an intelligence test, you're talking about the same person with the same brain now, the intelligence test scores will differ. Which indicates again here, depending on what personality has your brain under its control, you can be dumb or smart. We've seen those. Also, more fundamentally, some recent information came out that showed, in one instance, a woman who had diabetes in one personality, when the other personality took over, the diabetes was absent. Same body. How do you explain this? Some personalities are allergic to one thing, and the other personality is allergic to something else. Same nose, same body. So when the individual is in one personality, they can't stand this food, and when in the other, they can't stand that one. And when they're in the other one, the one they couldn't stand in one personality, now they can eat without any reaction. Hope you're getting what I'm implying here, ladies and gentlemen. I'm trying to talk about then how the implantation, when you let another people implant a personality into you, how then it can take your whole body and your whole brain and your whole mind. To a very great extent, the sicknesses of our people, the cancer that our people suffer from, the high blood pressure, the heart disease, all of the other diseases for which our people are dying at 4 and 5 times the rate of the Caucasian is the result of that implanted personality into the black body itself. An implanted personality that is cooperating with the European in such a way that it is literally committing suicide and works toward its own destruction. A personality that is literally then taught to be dumb. We notice then when you have these different personalities, one can be perceptive, another one very dull. One can be very legalistic, another one can be very confused. In other words then, when you let another people create and implant into your personality, they will implant the kind of personality that is consistent with their civilization. And you must understand then that a major part of liberation of black people then is what we call self-creation. Which means then that it is essential that we be in control of the conditions under which we exist as a part of creating our own self. But a people who are not aware of themselves and have no self-knowledge or unable to do so. It's interesting to note that the foundations of the human personality are laid between the ages of birth and 2 to 3 years old. And that's a peculiarity of human beings in a way. In other words, then, much of the way I behave and we behave in general is the result of things that occur to us between the ages of birth and 3 years old. And yet, how many of you can recall in very vivid detail when you were 2 years old and 3 years old? Certainly you may remember 1 or 2 things, but the greater part of those years are buried and lost to you. But do you understand what we're getting at here now? In other words, we are saying the very things that direct our personalities and the very things which are the foundation of our behavior and attitudes toward the world are the very things we can't what? We can't remember. We can't recall. We can't get to. And yet they are there directing us, creating our reactions, creating how we see the world, our attitudes and our tastes and our values and so forth. And what I'm trying to then say by analogy then is simply because you don't know yourself or you don't read your history or have a knowledge of your history does not mean then you're not victimized by that history. And therefore one of the major things then that helps to keep us out of our minds as a people is that we do not know ourselves. And we don't know then the sources of our behavior. And you get then many people asking, why do we behave this way? Why can't we get together? Why can't we trust each other? Why is it that our organizations don't work out? That's the sign of a people who what? Don't know themselves. When you have to keep asking yourself these kind of questions, which is what we hear every day all the time, it means then that self-knowledge is lacking. And ladies and gentlemen, those questions can be found by studying and reading one's own history. But you've been frightened of that history because you've been told that that history is one of shame. When you read it, you get angry. You get guilty. You feel anxiety. And therefore, you tend to stay away from it because it is so-called unpleasant. And this, of course, is why people are kept away from truth. This is why in this world that is run by liars, we love the lies that we are told. This is why we work very hard to be taught the lies by these people. Because the lies make us feel good and the truth makes us feel bad. And therefore we avoid the truth. Why is the neurotic individual twisted? Because the traumatic event that made him or her neurotic is the event that he cannot face, the event that he cannot relive again, the event that he wants to keep out of his mind. And therefore keeping it out of his mind and denying its existence, it is free then to influence his or her behavior. And the longer then we as people keep away from a deep knowledge of ourselves and a confrontation with ourselves, then the longer we stay out of our minds as a people. The other thing then is we don't know our enemy as well. For the histories you read in these schools are not the history of the European. For they are lying histories as well. Any good reading of American history with these so-called Puritans. You know, I was looking at a movie here around Thanksgiving. It was a very interesting little movie that slipped through there. Spencer Tracy was on this ship, and he was the captain of the ship, and these Puritans were on board, you know, these holy, sanctimonious people. And he treated them very roughly. And one day they got around to asking him, says, Captain, why do you hate us? You know? He says, I hate you because I know you are a bunch of hypocrites. That you are going to go over there with your piety and rape and rob the savages of everything they got. while you're pretending to be religious. And so you get a history of a people looking for religious freedom and religious expression, while they hung and strung Indians and robbed and stole and killed and did everything possible. But these were the people who taught you how to be a religious person, aren't they? Yes. But you're not taught that in your little high school and your little college histories, are you? No. You taught that Thanksgiving, these people, do you know Thanksgiving is an Indian holiday? Taken from the Indians? Not a European holiday? And after these Europeans had their butts saved from starvation and death, they rewarded the Indian with death and destruction? But no, we get a purified history, a history that is sanitized and untruthful. Just as you get a purified civics lesson. This is how a bill goes through Congress. Nothing about the wheeling and the dealing, nothing about the briberies, nothing about corruptions and the reality of the system. As a matter of fact, if you teach the realities of what's going on, you're seen as a bad teacher. I found it interesting if you read Kozo's book called Death at an Early Age, where he talks about educating black children in the Boston school systems, and how he was fired by that system for reading Langston Hughes to a class of black students, because Langston Hughes was not on the approved reading list of the Boston schools at that time. In fact, no black poet was on the reading list. And then the poem he read was a poem about landlords. And he was also fired because his supervisor said, we don't want you reading poems to children that are negative. We don't want our children to feel bad, you see. So then if you talk about reality, you make them feel bad and you make them feel anxiety and you make them see what the world is really about. We don't want them to experience that. And I found out, ladies and gentlemen, then that what we call education is an education into fairy tales, because the teacher doesn't want to feel uncomfortable, or they don't want to make the students feel uncomfortable. So therefore, we talk to you in such intellectualized and abstract language until then you can read and talk without having any real emotional experiences, and therefore not confront the world for what it is. And consequently then, the very education itself takes you away from self-knowledge and a knowledge of reality in and as it is. So then what we are saying, when you are not educated in terms of your history, you're not educated in terms of your experience, then you do not know from whence those impulses and compulsions in your personality spring. You do not know why you behave the way you do. Plus it means then that the feelings are out of control. The other characteristic mentioned here is the characteristic called an ability to exercise voluntary control over behavior. Normal individuals feel fairly confident about their ability to control their behavior. How can you control your behavior if you don't have an efficient perception of reality? And you don't know what reality is. And you've been taught reality by people whose interest it is to keep you out of your mind. How can you have a voluntary control over your behavior when you have no self-knowledge? It's impossible. You hypnotize an individual, for instance, and you tell that individual, when I straighten up my collar, you're going to stand up and you're going to salute the flag of the United States of America. Now, you're not going to remember, though, that I told you this, but you're going to do it. Now, you wake him up out of his hypnotic state, and you talk and you do several things, and then after again, this individual who's been hypnotized, he may sit back and appear to be relaxed, but he's watching out of the corners of his eyes. He's sensitive to whatever move is being made by the hypnotist. Even though other people may not notice it, he's sensitized and he's alert, in sense he's hyper alert to the movements that's going to be made by the hypnotist. Such that when the hypnotist then starts to fiddle with his collar, he stands up and he hesitates for a moment, then he stands up and he begins to repeat the Pledge of Allegiance. And when you ask him then, why are you repeating this allegiance? He's not going to tell you, I don't know why. No, he's going to say, you know, I think we should be more patriotic in this country. This country has been so good to us. We should pay it great honor to the... Now, what is going on here? This is a typical example of what we call rationalization. Now, if you talk to that person who did that, the person would swear that what they are saying is what? It's true. It's true. And you could not convince them that what they are saying and the reason they are giving for their behavior is not truth. Even though you being a witness have seen why they're doing what they're doing. What we are looking at then is an individual who has no self-knowledge in this particular area. But despite that lack of self-knowledge, that individual's behavior is still controlled by that which he does not know. So consequently, that person has no control over that particular behavior. In other words, then, that behavior is involuntary, even though the individual may deceive himself into thinking that it is voluntary, that he did it of his own free will. You see, this system is a very slick one, ladies and gentlemen. It is a system that is bound to make you feel freest, at the very point when you're under its greatest control. It sort of reminds you of a person who's under the heavy sway of drugs and who feels as free as a bird at the very moment the drug has the greatest control over his behavior. It's a part of this contradiction. And we have people then who think that they can be free while they're under the control of the European. And they're caught up. And who think then that they are controlling their behavior when what has happened, that implanted personality, that created personality is operating within their bodies and controlling their behaviors. And to a good extent then, they spend their life rationalizing a behavior of which they do not really know the foundations. And therefore then, a people who have little self-knowledge and a people who have no efficient perception of reality are a people then who are not really in control of their behavior. Hypnosis is an interesting thing, and I wish we had time to discuss it, because the thing that fascinates me about it is that it's done through the use of words. You know, just words. A person is able to talk with you and in the end get you to do all kinds of things just through what? Through language. And by controlling those words, he's able in a sense to implant some kind of complex in your personality. And once that complex is implanted, you know, that complex that says you will listen only to my voice, you know, and you will respond only to me. And you will not hear or pay attention to what is going on outside of what I am saying to you as a person, you see. Now, what has happened then? Now, I'm going to take you back to when you were 3, or I'm going to do this and that. And you can see the client responding to these suggestions and behaving in ways that he or she would not behave if they were not under hypnosis. What has happened here in part then? What has happened in part is that the hypnotist has implanted into the personality of that individual a complex. And that complex then is responsive to the hypnotist. And it is also then in control of the individual's behavior. And therefore, the hypnotist, by speaking to it and relating to it, then is able to gain control over the individual himself. So then when we look and when we say that the African personality that we see today is the result of Eurocentric conditioning, when we say that the personality that is in us today is a personality that we would not have put in ourselves were we in control of ourselves, we are saying then that we have a personality that is not responding to whom? To us, but is responding to its what? Creator. And the European then has created this personality in us, and it only knows how to respond to its creator. When you let then another people educate you and condition you and control your reality and place into you ideas and ethics and values and other kinds of things, and put into you emotions and other kinds of things, it is through these implanted things that they will control and manipulate your behavior as a people. That is one of the reasons why your self-knowledge was removed. Your African symbols. What is a symbol? Some of you now, if I raise the cross, you will become prayerful. You'd want to fall on your knees and pray. And if we played a little tune, you'd all of a sudden get solemn and feel the spirit as it came through. Some of you, if we raise the flag, you're ready to go to war. Shows Uncle Sam wants you. Let's go. Play the stars and the stripes. You know, they used to get soldiers to do that, get a band and march down the street playing stars and stripes and, you know, playing patriotic music, and the boys just fall in line and march right on down to the draft station and go right on out and get themselves killed. Yeah. What is going on here? What is going on here is that the flag and these symbols of various types have been implanted very, very early in life, such that when those symbols are raised and manipulated, they manipulate the individual's feelings themselves. And the individual responds to these symbols. That is why you have no African symbols, because we cannot afford to give it to you, because then you will respond to the wrong symbols. You must be taught only to respond through the symbols that the European places before your eyes and react to it. And then he gives you symbols of prestige. 3-piece suits, $500, makes you a great man. Yeah, sneakers made in Formosa with one strip running this way and that way, makes you jump and fly through the air. Symbols. Cigarette in your mouth, riding on a horse, you's a man. Marlboro. So here's a man thinking smoking a cigarette somehow makes him a man, when there's no relationship between smoking a cigarette and being a man. Smoking a cigarette, you've come a long way, baby. Killing yourself, destroying yourself, and meanwhile you feeling the best. Here you are poised, committing suicide while being sophisticated. And this is the kind of thing. And when you look through the ads, this is what you get, isn't it? Music. Michael Jackson and Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola. Yeah. If I drink Coke, I'll be like Michael. If I drink Pepsi or whatever it is, I'll be like Richie. What do we got? Associations, conditioning. Just like dogs. Just like the Pavlovian dog. Yeah, just like the Skinner rat. You feed this dog out of a dish over and over time, and now you show him the dish and the dog starts salivating like he wants to eat the dish. Why? Because you've associated two things that before were what? Not even related one to the other. And this is what hypnotism is about, ladies and gentlemen. This is what manipulation is about. Cueing things. And so we get symbols: curly hair, long hair, light skin, white skin, suits, diamonds, this and that. And then you come out to be nothing but then worshipers of idolatry, idol worshipers. You will die and kill and murder and rape and rob to get these little symbolic things in your hand. You sell death to your children so you can ride in a Cadillac or ride a BMW, something like that. You're not looking just for a ride in an efficient car. You got to ride this one. I ask my students often, when you go to the movie and you saw a movie that had black cowboys in it, how would you feel? Feel unreal. Doesn't feel right. Why is it that you don't feel right, even though well over a third or more of the so-called cowboys were black? And during an unfortunate part of our history, many of the cavalries that so-called cleared the Indian of the West were black. And yet, because this has been left out of your history and has not become a part of your personality, or it's been negated, when you go to the movie and you see this, you not only you get even a body feeling. You see, so it's not merely a lack of knowledge, but it is an actual physiological body reaction that is created by the symbol. So consequently, you see our people, we are like Pavlovian dogs, and we have to face it, where we let another people associate through music and through this and through that various symbols, such that all they have to do is hold them up and manipulate us, and that which they have created inside of us responds to these symbols, and we cannot escape their influence. So consequently, we cannot exercise voluntary control over our emotion and over our behavior. And there are so many ways you can hypnotize people. One of the ways, of course, you can hypnotize them is through authority. Right? Yeah, see, you read hypnotism books and they tell you some people you can hypnotize just by literally commanding them. If they respect your authority enough, they'll just go into a hypnotic trance. That's what I tell my people in my class all the time. I tell you something, you don't want to half believe it. White man came in here and told you, you take it all in. The very people who lied to you most are the people you're the quickest to believe. Hypnotism. In fact, you won't believe it until what? Until they say it. Until you see some proof or some white authority. Therefore, white skin itself becomes a symbol of authority in and of itself. An individual responds to it unconsciously and consciously. And therefore, anything connected with them gains the authority as well. So one of your colleagues go to a white college. You ready to believe it. You went to a black college? Well, I think about what you have to say. You got a degree from Harvard? Oh, all right, come in here and tell us anything you want to tell us. And therefore, the things that are connected, we respond to them. This is what we call in psychology generalization, right? You learn one thing, and if it's similar or related to that which you learn, mistake of getting angry and resentful in dealing with the European. Because it is through anger and resentment that the personality is implanted into you as a people. It is through losing control over your mind and responding senselessly that the devil is placed into you as a person yourself. It is through anger and resentment that you become like the person that you are angry with and resent. Somebody calls you a fool. Who? I'm not a fool. You demonstrated right away. That made you into one right off. And so and now when they get, and now many of us as people are filled with anger. We're filled with rage, hurt, fear, and anxiety. And that becomes a chronic part of our nature, which is one of the reasons why we suffer so much from the physical ills that we do. And we are susceptible to the kind of diseases that we're susceptible to. And yet having this anger and fear and resentment in us, that anger, fear, and resentment blinds us also to reality. Makes us see the world in a distorted fashion. Plus it becomes a handle by which the other people can manipulate us into doing and saying things when if we had a cooler mind we would not have done or said. And I'll speak more to this a little later on about how this anger and resentment, it makes you reject things and refuse to deal with things that should be dealt with. It makes you see the world backwards and see it wrong. And therefore, one of the things you do if you want to work somebody's mind often is to make them angry first. See? And then work them through their anger. Watch me say this and watch him go off. you know, we do this in our personal relations. You get to know your woman or your man well, and you know where you can touch their nerves. And you just touch nerves all day and night, touching nerves, and watching them jump and bounce like a baby doll. Oh, string them. And therefore, even though our anger is justified as a people, and the kind of experiences we've been through certainly have been scarring ones, we must still bring them under our control and not let them be under the control of another people, because they're going to manipulate them and use them to their advantage time in and time again. It means then that these symbols must be looked at very closely for what they're worth and for the function that they serve. Why were the whites, both liberals and conservatives, frightened by the Muslims? Why was the Nation of Islam, particularly under Elijah Muhammad, such a frightening thing to these people? One of the reasons, of course, is the fact that this was not a NAACP number or an Urban League number that left what? The European symbols unmolested, you see, and left the whole conditioning system that they placed around us untouched. The nation under the Honorable Elijah Muhammad threatened to replace what? The very symbols themselves. The very conditioning cues themselves were to be restructured, such that then the old symbols that were used to manipulate us would no longer be used and could no longer be to function in holding us under the control of the European. This is why when we talk about creating changes in our people, we must talk about then the presentation of a total system, not just a jobs program, not just a housing program or this program. You must offer, as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad did, a total program that involves housing, religion, education, economics, the total thing, and all of those things wrapped in new symbols and new means to which the people can respond, such that then the older system loses its control and power over the personality of the individuals. You see then, because as long as you respond to the old systems, the white liberal as well as the white conservative uses those symbols to manipulate our personality to what they want, to get us to do what they would like for us to do. The next thing that's indicated here in terms of the so-called normal and abnormal individual, self-esteem and self-acceptance. Well-adjusted people have some appreciation of their own self-worth. very interesting, of their own self-worth. Means that they have a way of measuring themselves that is to a degree independent of the way other people measure themselves. They have a sense of their worth that does not necessarily depend upon what other people say and do in relationship to them. They then see themselves as having an importance and worth, and see themselves as being acceptable even when other people may be telling them otherwise. We look at our situation today. Our leadership is one that does not base the self-esteem of black people upon the values and ethics of African people themselves. This is a major problem that we have. You know, it's sort of like women in the old sense of the word, before women's liberation came along. I am nothing until I get a man. I am nothing until I, what? Get a husband. Until I can, what? Take his name. I can become identified with them. I am not important until I am some way made important through marriage or through identification. It's interesting to note then how much modern so-called black leadership operates with that same thing in mind, with that same approach. I will be nothing until the white man loves me, until the white man accepts me. To a good extent, assimilationism is a form of marriage. We won't be happy and love ourselves until we hook these people into us, until we seduce them to love us. We know that a part of the foundation of the so-called integration movement was not education of black children, because we know 2 + 2 is 4 anywhere in the world. It's 2 + 2 is 4 in Harlem. You don't have to go to Long Island to learn that. You don't have to go into a white school to learn 2 + 2 is 4. What kind of stupidness is it that tells us that somehow we cannot learn what needs to be learned unless we're sitting next to a white child? Aren't words just words? Aren't these, can't we teach our children what they need to learn wherever they are? But somehow we got an educational leadership, or we got a leadership that says somehow our learning is impaired unless we are sitting with whites. But actually, when we study the history very carefully, we note that the real point of the integration of schools was not that of education of black children, but that of getting black children to love themselves by getting white children to love them. And you remember the old Kenneth Clark experiments, right? The black dolls and the white dolls, and how the black children supposedly didn't want to accept the black dolls, and some of them would fall out crying because they saw the black dolls and they wanted the white dolls. You know, they went through this whole thing, and the Supreme Court decision was somehow related to this, indicating then that because these children were not accepted and loved, and they were made to think that blackness was a terrible thing, they needed then the love of little white children so that they could get around to themselves. That they were, in a sense, nothing until they could identify and become one with white people. And consequently, then, the motivation was to marry these people and to identify with them. And what happens when you marry these people and do this? Often the thing happened that happened to many women when they used to operate on this premise. If your status is gained by marriage and not by what you do for yourself, then your energies will be put into seduction. So the woman could spend all of her day combing her hair and fixing up her body, because this was her tool for getting that man who was going to make her something. She could spend all of her energy shopping and all of her time making sure that her bodily features and so forth were right to seduce a man in one fashion or another. When she engaged in this often, it meant that she ignored many other aspects of her personality. In a sense, she even made herself dumb, because many of the men she dealt with didn't like smart women. So either she refused to learn because she figured that would get in her way, or she had to act dumb in front of them because she didn't want to insult them. And she found that being smart was a liability. And by being smart, she looked like she was trying to be a man, like me. You see? And so consequently, often she had to hide and repress many of the other aspects of her personality and leave many areas of her life undeveloped in order to gain acceptance by the so-called men. And when you look at our people, you see this kind of thing with the kind of leadership. If we can identify with the whiteys, like a woman, we can, you know, it says what? In the old days, the woman got the status of a husband, right? So she didn't have to do anything but what? Marry the guy. So if he was what? Big time, she was big time because she was his wife. Even though she might not have what? Done anything herself. And many of our people are like that. If we can marry this white man, if we can become identified with this white man, and therefore we will become Mrs. America, and therefore we can identify with all of the accomplishments of America, not ourselves, not with something that what? We've done on our own, not with developing our own independent power and personality, but by identifying with these people, we can literally then steal their prestige and their power and become one with them, and therefore neglect our own self-development. So many of the assimilationists then are trying the shortcut to prestige, that is through marriage of the European, and through identifying the European, and through seduction like a woman. And yet, like many women, what is going to happen? If that man decides to leave you one day, and there you sit, no job skills, don't even know how to write a checkbook, don't even know where to pay the bill, because he was so nice to me. He took care of everything. He didn't let me worry about nothing. And now you got 10 children and you don't know how to do a thing. Gone. This is why even if we got to live in greatest peace and harmony with this white man, if we as a people, though, have not developed our own potentials and our own power, when this man decides to divorce us, and sometimes in the future, we'll find that we are in worse shape than when we really started. So the point is not to become one and to unify with this white man. The point is to develop our own potential as a people and to develop our own power so that when he decides to walk out on us, we can say, go ahead, hit the road, Jack. And we can go on and deal with it. But our people are made weak by these feminist kinds of leaders that we have today, who are not concerned with the development of true black power and independence, but are concerned with taking the last name of another people and becoming identified with that other people. A person who has no self-esteem is a person who has no self-confidence, who's frightened of being alone. Many of us are frightened today. What would happen if the white man left us? We would go into the dark ages because we don't think we can invent all these little stereos and all of these other little things that these white folk and the Japanese invent. And so if they weren't in the world, we would really be in bad shape, wouldn't we? We'd have to sit around the campfire and tell each other stories. So then we have to keep them around because we feel that without them, we could not organize and run a world. This is the way we've been made to feel. Much like a woman who feels that without her man, I am nothing. Without you, I'm nobody. Without you, life has no meaning. How can I go on without you? You know, that's that sick love that's projected into our people through this music and this record. Sick, sick love. Very ill kind of love. Big, grown, and rusting. You can't live without somebody. Take my heart, here it is. Don't treat me bad. Okay. You are a grown person. You're not a babe in arms, even though you like to say it, rock me, baby. You know, talk little baby talk to me. You know, I'm not against having a nice little time. I love making love. It's wonderful. But then what I'm trying to get at here is that often people get into a very infantile state of mind when they fall in love. They give up control of themselves. They give up self-responsibility as such. They give up self-definition. They give up their feeling of importance to the other person. So therefore, I won't feel important unless you tell me I feel important. Make me feel important. Tell me you love me. Or else I won't feel right. And this is the way many of our people are. I'm going to make you love me. Yeah, you know, we had some of our leaders like that. I'm going to bug you and worry you until you love me. And many of us feel that we need these other people's love so that we can love ourselves. And therefore we have, and this is why you find many women catching the hell they do with a lot of men. Because they feel even though that man is kicking their butts, and even though the man is abusing them, it's a choice between the lesser of two evils. It would be better than them being by themselves. That somehow they'd be in worse shape than if they were by themselves than being with them. So therefore they have to put up with this abuse. And if they feel that they are nothing without this man, then they have to stay with him to feel something even though he's mistreating them. You see? And there's a person who has no real feeling and no real self-esteem and self-acceptance. And many of our people are in the same situation. We feel we will not be complete until these people love us, until they accept us. And therefore we are willing to put up with their abuse because we feel we'd be worse off without them. If they left us, then all of this good jazz, this good old stereo music would be gone because we don't know how to make TVs, do we? All these cars would be gone, and all this other stuff would be gone because the only thing we know about Africans is that they produce these things. They produce huts and this and that. So I don't want to live in no hut. I don't want to go back in no jungle. So the only thing, so we need these people. We know they treat us mean. We know they degrade us sometimes. But hey, it would be worse off if they weren't around, because niggas can't run nothing, you know. I hate to be in a world where there's all black people. You know. And therefore we put up and we take the abuse. And our only hope then becomes one of trying to convert these people. You see, it's like the woman says, he's nice when he ain't drunk. He's so sweet and loving. when he ain't got that alcohol. So what does she sit around waiting for him to stop drinking? So and by the time he stopped drinking, he's beat her to death. And this is the way we get it. By the time this white man learns to love you, you'll be dead. He's beat it all out of you. Wouldn't be worth loving after that anyway. I'm telling you. Yeah. Oh, we can see. Yeah, she sees how nice he could be. And this is the thing we get caught on. We see how nice it could be if they would love us. Instead of facing the reality that they don't. And facing the possibility of what? That they never will. And dealing with it. And operating on that basis. Instead of living in hopeless hope. Year in and year out. And this is the way we are caught up. We hope someday this drunken fool of a man, these sick people, are going to somehow get out of their sickness. And like a weak woman, here you are weak and thinking you're going to transform this man. The worst mistake many women make is to think that they're going to change some man. With enough love, with enough understanding, you know, doesn't happen. It rarely happens, ladies and gentlemen. And here you are, weak people here, and you think you're going to love with enough love and prayer before capital steps and laying down your lives in the army and doing all these sacrificial things that you do. Somehow that this person is going to see the real you. But you don't recognize, ladies and gentlemen, that this person depends on you being wrong. Don't you understand that? You know, you see the woman, she's being mistreated by the man. And what does she say? Well, what's wrong with me? Yeah, she sees her what? Herself as the problem. What's wrong with me? And then now she won't say, well, what? What's wrong with you? You must be sick or crazy. You don't know what good thing you got here. Then what does she do? Well, you say I'm too fat. She takes the weight off. You say my hair is too nappy, then she straightens it up. You say that I don't dress, she puts on a new dress. And what? Every time she makes a step, what happens? It's something else. It's something else. And you know this feeling, black people, because you've been through it, haven't you? What did they tell you about 20 years ago? If you'd only get education. And your parents told you, just get that education. You know, and you went out and busted your brain and got the education. And you found out again there was another thing going. Each time you make a move, there's a new demand. You can never get right. Because, ladies and gentlemen, so many people's own ego depends on other people always being what? Wrong. And when their ego and self-perception and their way of life itself depends on you being wrong, they are never going to let you be right. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference what you do. And when you look at the European and the way the European lives upon the backs of our people, and the way the European consumes and eats up the world's resources, and the European style of life, you must recognize then that that style of life depends upon you never being right. And you're never going to be enough and do enough to be accepted by these people, because their very life depends upon you being wrong. And you have to recognize that and face it. Then you will stop taking the abuse that is laid upon you by these people and get control of yourself. But when your self-acceptance depends upon their acceptance of you, what will happen if they never accept you as a person? When now you've spent all your time and energy trying to be accepted instead of developing yourself, instead of building up your own potentials, instead of becoming independent of these people, instead of becoming self-defining. When no matter what you do, ladies and gentlemen, you can jerry your curls all night long, you are not going to be white. I'm telling you. You can three-piece it. You can three-piece it all you want to. You can get your sophisticated language all you want to. You can read all the Shakespeare you want to read. You can keep up with Time magazine. You can read Wall Street Journal. You can do all the things you think they tell you you should do. And you're going to find out you are still just a nigga. In the end. Because his world depends upon you being so. And you're going to find out then, while you're getting all of this, you're going to leave so many other things undeveloped. So much power. And you have the power, ladies and gentlemen. You have the power. It is the European who is dependent, not the African. It is the European who is poor, not the African. One brother mentioned something one day I thought was very interesting when one young lady was talking to him, talking about how poor we were. And he says, can you exploit poor people? Can you take something from poor people? If you're really poor, can you really take something from them? Why is it that other people, Koreans and others, somehow can seem to get something out of these poor black people? How is it that the Europeans can get all of this wealth out of the poor black nations? How is it that the Japanese who live on a rock in the middle of the sea can be wealthy while these poor black nations are starving to death? It is the European that is dependent upon our people. Why is there a struggle in South Africa today? Because Southern Africa represents, as someone described it, the Gold Coast of the minerals that are needed by the Europeans to survive as a nation and as a people. There are minerals and metals and so forth in the southern regions of Africa for which this nation and other European nations cannot live without, ladies and gentlemen. The space age would not be even possible without those metals. If those metals were not gotten into this country, it was stated that we would reverse our living conditions some 50 years or more. There are metals which Southern Africa produces almost 100% of. And about the only other European-controlled nation that has those minerals and metals is Russia. And yet we are told that we are dependent as a people. This black people in this United States are called poor people. And yet we know that if you look at the wealth of black people in this country, we are about the 9th or 10th richest nation, but we refuse to think of ourselves as a nation. And we refuse to act as a nation. That is the poverty, not the lack of money. A people who spend 5 cents out of every dollar for their own people and give 95 cents out of every dollar to another people are not a poor people. And they make other people rich. In the so-called ghetto of Harlem, if you would stop and think, you must recognize that there are billions of dollars passed through that ghetto, day in and day out. Billions. Just think about the absentee landlords who soak up your money. The store owners, the teachers that teach in your neighborhood, the policemen, the other people, thousands and thousands and millions of dollars being earned and worked right through your fingers. And you're saying you're poor people. See, a lack of definition. So consequently, when you define yourself in terms of another people's standards, you will always come up lacking in something and come up deviant. And it is a pitiful kind of thing, because what you see happening in Harlem has happened the world over. You go in parts of Africa, and what are you going to see running the stores? Indians, Muslims, and whatever other number except African people themselves. Which means the game that is run on the African mind is being run the world over. And yet these are supposed to be poor people. And yet other people are getting rich, working them from one end to the other. The other thing that's mentioned here is an ability to form affectionate relationships as a part. Normal individuals are able to form close and satisfying relationships with other people. They are sensitive to the feelings of others and do not make excessive demands on others to gratify their own needs. Often mentally disturbed people are so concerned with protecting their own security that they become extremely self-centered and preoccupied with their own feelings and strivings. They seek affection but are unable to reciprocate. Sometimes they fear intimacy because their past relationships have been destructive. In other words, a part of the normal individual's personality is his ability to love and to relate in terms of affection with others, to form close and satisfying relationships with others. That's an amazing kind of thing when you look at the situation our society is in today, right? With the divorce rates as they are, must recognize that there's something wrong. We want to be just like them. Why do you get married? I was in love. You can ask, I guess 9 out of 10 people, and they will give you that. So much in love, they say. Deeply in love. Then getting married for love must not be a good reason, is it? If all these people we saw getting married were getting married for love, man, that gives love a bad reputation as a basis for marriage. It is not enough to love, ladies and gentlemen. You must love for the right reason. And that is the problem. Not love itself, but loving for the wrong reason. A love based on sickness and neurosis. A love that comes out of the sick side of the personality. Certainly it may make you feel good. Certainly it makes you feel high. Certainly it makes you feel wonderful. Certainly it's a feeling you've never had before. But it does not say that the basis of that feeling is necessarily a healthy one. And so the problem often with the neurotic individual is not that the neurotic individual is unable to love, but that the neurotic individual loves for the wrong reason, on the wrong basis. And that love then becomes destructive, destroys himself and destroys the partner. And this is the thing that we must watch. For we are taught to love, you know. Love is a learned thing as well. We're made to think, oh, it's something that's just natural, that just flows right out. But no, not necessarily. there's a lot of teaching that goes into what love is. And of course, we see it every day on radio and TV. When your kids sit down and listen to the music, they're being taught what love is. When you can't eat and when you can't sleep, that's love. When you think about them all the time and you can't get them off your mind, that's love. You know? And in a way, they're being subliminally, the love is being defined. So when you think about them all the time, that's love, you know? When you can't eat and you can't sleep and all of this, that's love. And the records tell you how you should feel and what love is. Then you look at Dynasty, and then you look at this one, and then you read the novels, and so forth. You can literally date love in the European experience when romance became the basis of marriage. It was not always so. And it's only about 200 to 300 years old, as far as this culture is concerned. And you can see it working in parallel with the introduction of novels and books and the printing press and the dissemination of novels and poetry and so forth that began to teach people how to love and how to feel when they were in love. And you can see that it was developed out of the palaces and courts of the Europeans. And as it worked its way down into the so-called lower classes, and they began to respond to each other in terms of these defined ways of loving. So consequently then, often love is a taught situation, not something that just is spontaneous as we've been made to think. Which means then that we can be taught to love in the wrong way and for the wrong reason, despite how good the feelings make us. The other thing about love is often it is based, again, on the early experience of the individual. One's love basically is related to the relationship one has with parents and early people and adults in one's early life. That's one of the reasons why when we see romantic love, particularly in this culture, it has so many immature aspects about it. It is so childish in many of its expressions, because often it harkens back to our first love relationship, which was, of course, the love relationship with our mothers and our fathers. And essentially then, the kind of love affairs we have, to a great extent, are in some way related to those early affairs. And if those early affairs with mother and those early affairs with daddy and other people around us were twisted and distorted, then our love also, even as an adult, tends to be twisted and distorted as well. If then, ladies and gentlemen, and this is what I talk about, thank you very much, in terms of Freud, when Freud lays the basis for mental problems on the mother-child relationship, we have to say that we have to go a little farther than Freud, because we must recognize that the relationship between the black child and its mother is not a relationship that occurs in a vacuum. It is a relationship that occurs in a political, social system. And to a great extent, that relationship is a political one, not merely just a purely human relational one. That is, often the attitudes, the way our mothers relate to us, are to a great extent determined by her own struggles with a racist system. Often her love or dislike or negligence or abuse is in some way related to the experience of black people politically and socially as a people. When somehow she finds the little curly one, the little curly-headed one a little more attractive than the nappy-headed one. When somehow the lighter one gets more attention than the darker one. Or when somehow she has problems relating to black people in general, she's going to have a problem relating to her own black children. Which means then that the love and the kind of love that is exhibited often between the mother and child and the father and child is reflective of the relationship between that mother and father with the larger system. And if the larger system has a distorted and falsified and lying and twisted relationship with these mothers and fathers, then often the mothers and fathers' love of their children is also twisted and distorted. And it means then that they grow up and love in a twisted and distorted way to the people they relate to. And consequently, they destroy their love partners and they destroy their own families in the interest of the masters who rule over them. That's why we must recognize that the black family, you see, cannot be intact. It is deliberately destroyed. And it is destroyed subtly. It makes the people who make up that family the agents of its destruction. And it makes them see each other as the cause of their problem, rather than seeing the manipulation that works through them, and rather than seeing that implanted personality of the white man as it works through them and it tears each other apart. And so you get some conferences like male-female relations, and you watch black males and females tear each other up and blame each other. If you would do this and if y'all would do that. And the white man who created both of you has escaped the whole business. And you create, and you hear conference after conference after conference. And you talk about how are we going to save the black children. You got to save yourself first as a parent, ladies and gentlemen. You're not going to save any children being evil and throwing up yourself as a parent. You must recognize that your own personality has to be restructured. Normal people do not drive other people crazy. Only crazy people drive other people crazy. You must think about that. If your children are going crazy, it's because you're crazy. Deal with it. If you're normal, you're not driving people crazy. Because the child reacts to your personality and inculcates that personality into itself. And then as that brain is programmed by those reactions, it reacts to other people because that's the only thing it knows. And that's the only experience it has had as a people. Crazy people cannot act normal. That's the process of being crazy. If we have let another people drive us crazy, put us out of our minds, made us unable to love ourselves, a people who, through Pavlovian condition, have made black represent everything evil. So that when you see black hair, it's bad hair. When you see blackness itself, it's bad. And everything identified with blackness and Africanness is seen as primitive or uncivilized or unstructured and so forth, so that the people themselves want to escape from themselves and get outside of themselves. How can those people create healthy children? And therefore your children are made crazy by us for the master. And when they get on the couch, they sit there and blame you for it. My daddy left me. My mama treated me this way and that way. And those old Freudian psychologists sit there and indulge you while you blame your mother and your daddy all night. And refuse to get you to look beyond. Well, let's see, son, what drove them crazy? Why are they out of their minds? Maybe we should spend the next few sessions analyzing how they were driven crazy. Then we'll get back to you in about a month. And maybe we can work this thing through. But you see, when you do it that way, you make a patient a rebel. And as I said before, the black patient should come out of therapy a rebel and a revolutionary. If your therapy does not make you a revolutionary, it has not worked. Because no sane individual is going to adjust to the system the way it is. And therefore, we cannot define mental health in terms of adjustment to the system as it is. A sane individual would have to be about destroying this system before it destroys him. This white man is taking us all to our deaths. He has us all sitting here wondering when the end is going to come. It is madness. Into you in those first 2 and 3 years that we talked about earlier. Those 2 or 3 years that you don't remember, but those 2 or 3 years which shaped your basic personality and shaped what excites you and what turns you on. And therefore, since you can't remember those years, you also don't have any idea of why you feel the way you do. All you do is just have this feeling. And you're responding to this feeling. You can't help yourself. And why you get that feeling that if they abandon you, you can't live without them. Like if your parents abandon you at age 2 or 3, you feel like you couldn't live without them as well. Why you feel helpless in their hands. We find that. Therefore, a people who cannot love themselves are going to have difficulty loving someone else. And this is a part of the problem. I talked with some fine black women who've developed some schools and those schools gained a reputation for being very academically advanced, and the students were very academically advanced. And they told me quite often that after they would get these students up, these black students up, giving them an Afrocentric education, get them up where they were ahead of the average, even ahead of their so-called white counterparts, then often the parents would come in and take them out of the school and then take them over to a white school. And then when you'd ask them, well, why are you doing this? I mean, they're doing well and the whole bit, and so forth. And they would acknowledge that, well, we got to teach them how to live with other people, how to get along with all other folk. You hear this constantly. And you want to tell them, but don't you think that the first thing they should learn is how to get along with their own people? How to get along with themselves first as a people? How to love themselves and relate to themselves as people? How to unite, how to organize, how to work together, how to do the necessary things for our liberation before you start focusing them on loving of the other people. The ability to love other people well comes through first the ability to love oneself. You cannot love other people well and hate your own self. For what you call love is a twisted, distorted, neurotic kind of love. And it's a love that destroys you as well as the other individual. Or it destroys your group, because these will be the same ones who will go out and marry these white women and produce biological suicide because they don't want any children to look like they do. They want them to look different, and the more differently they look from themselves, the more they love them. So consequently, their love is a love that, if it were permitted to continue, would destroy their own ethnic group and destroy themselves. And yet they would call it loving other people. The Japanese don't have to send their children all across America to outrun this country. They're making better cars, they're making better stereos, they're making better everything. I don't see a whole bunch of Japanese running out here all over the place trying to get educated by white folk. They seem to be able to educate their children fairly well to the degree that they can compete with these people. Why is it we feel that we can't then do the same? Why is it we feel that we have to push them under someone else who does not want them? So consequently then, when we love, when you let another people create in you a personality of their own liking, as we talked about earlier, when you let another people condition your personality, what is it then that you love in the other person? If the personality in that other individual has been created by your enemy, and your own personality has also been created by your enemy, then what are you loving? You must understand that. So when you fall in love, you're falling in love with an implant, a falsification. And that kind of love cannot but destroy you and destroy your family and destroy your people. And therefore, when you base your love upon the images of another people, then you can only love those things in your own woman or in your own man. And you cannot afford to love them as they are. And you cannot accept them in terms of the reality that they represent. And therefore, they must, in order to get along with you, live outside of themselves and live in a false relationship with you. And you must then live in a false relationship with them as well. And it's difficult to live a lie day in and day out. And this is what happens to our families and to our loves when we let another people shape the personalities and implant those personalities into ourselves. When you let the white woman represent your standard of beauty, your standard of femininity, when you let her features represent that which is lovable and desirable, when you let her represent the height of womanhood to you, when you let her love mean that you are a man, when you love your own woman, then you will always feel you're loving second best. She'll never be quite the woman you want her to be. Or you will find yourself trying to create her, and therefore you become godlike in your relationship to her, trying to make her over in the image of the white woman and hating her when she doesn't become so, and then destroying her for not being so. You're like that God of the Old Testament. If you don't do what I say, I'll flood you out. And if you don't, that's not enough, I'll put some fire to you the next time. You know? And it's just that she'd be just like man, be as sinful as ever. But you know, this is what we have. When you then love out of this kind of situation we're talking about, you love out of deprivation. Well, my daddy wasn't at home, and so what you looking for now, sugar daddy? Love me, daddy. You want to become a little girl again? Because you never had a chance to be a little girl? Your daddy never got a chance to hold you by your hands and protect you and make you feel secure? Keep all the bad guys away and the other people off of you? Tell you, don't worry, darling, I'll take care of everything? You missed that, didn't you? So now you're going to get it out of a man. And the man himself is a little boy, though. Because he's never been permitted to grow up either. He doesn't know what it means to be a man. He hasn't been trained to be a father. He's been raised by his mama. And the only thing he knows is that women are something to be depended upon, to be used. He might have seen his mama laying around with a few people. And for him, a lot of women are whores if you don't watch them. Oh yes, let's deal with the reality here, ladies and gentlemen. He might have been spoiled by his mama, so he didn't have to pick up after himself. She cooked and washed his dirty drawers, set up with the light on, waiting for him to get home all night. And he wants a girl just like old mama was, he says. And here you are needing a daddy, and here he is needing a mama. And it's just not going to work out. He's caught up. He loves out of deprivation. And people who've been deprived and feel deprived, who cannot make for themselves their own world, and therefore they're brought up thinking that they've always been left out, and they've always been denied something, will then often try to get what is left out or what they feel denied through somebody else. They become needy in their love. I need you. But babe, I don't love you. But darling, I need you. I don't care if you don't love me. I need you. If I need you, that's all that's necessary. You mean to tell me that I was born just to come here to be needed by you? That I have nothing to do with it? And you have some men and people who love that way, right? Yeah. If I need you, forget it. I don't care how you feel about it. You know? And they get so caught up in their own needs and so caught up in their own deprivations and get so caught up in trying to fulfill the emptiness in their lives and so caught up in trying to build up their degraded self-image. Make me feel like a woman. Make me feel like a man. Make me feel like a king. Make me feel like a queen. And I've seen some even Afrocentric marriages caught up in that. The man wants to be made to feel like an African king, and the woman wants to be made to feel like an African queen, and they are playing some role that does not deal with the realities in which they are facing and the realities that surround them, but they're trying to play a game with each other, trying to make up for what they feel are lacks, and often the other individual cannot provide what the individual really likes. No one can ever really take the place of your mother. No one can ever really take the place of your father. And it becomes unfair to demand that they do. But some people, they're so needy until the only thing they can think about is their need. They spend their days and their nights concerning their needs. They become centered and focused on their needs to such an extent where they can no longer pay attention to the other person. They become insensitive to the other individual. They become unresponsive to the other person. They do not even see the other person. They can only perceive them in relationship to their own needs at the moment and in no other way. And often then when they fall in love, they fall in love in terms of their needs and not what the person really is. And then they dare the person to be other than what they need. And when the person breaks through, the reality breaks through, they feel betrayed and hurt. And they want to fight and destroy. And this is the problem then that we must work with. Because the essential thing that we must do as a people is learn to love one another deeply and sincerely. And that's not easy. Because when we look at each other, we see ourselves. And if we've been taught to hate ourselves, then we will hate each other. Because we are mirror images of ourselves as people. Why is it so difficult? We have people who fear love. Love is a hurting thing, we say. Right? Love don't love nobody. You know, and this love will beat you to death. So some of us, I don't want to get into this thing because I won't be able to handle it. If this person leaves me, if it doesn't work out the way I want it to work, it drives me crazy. I go out of my mind. And so we fear love often. Or we fear that if the person loves us, they're going to take control of us. Many men have a problem with that. Fearing love. Don't let her know you love her, man, because she's going to use you. Take advantage of you. So you find that they'll move one step forward and, man, I'm liking this too much. Step back. And so the woman, you wonder what the heck is going on. One moment you love it, next moment you don't. Often, of course, the man is wrestling with this concept of whether he will become dependent and lose control of himself. And it's really something when you're one of the types that believe in a woman as being weaker and inferior. And it really gets to your goat when you're in love with somebody that's weaker and inferior to you. And this is the problem many men have, I'm superior, I'm great, I'm supposed to be in control, and this little, she's got my mind messed up. And he loves her and he hates her at the same time. He loves the feeling and the this and the that, but he also hates the fact that she has that power over him. And consequently, he sends out messages that neutralize each other and fight each other and create conflict with each other. And he destroys his relationship, often pleading at the same time about how he loves the person. And the love in itself then becomes an instrument of destruction. And often this comes out of being a part of a society where you have and you are victimized by people who don't know what love is. You cannot love God and hate your neighbor. Isn't that what they told you? You cannot love and be religious and be evil. Now, ladies and gentlemen, a people truly capable of love, are not people then who are going to be destructive and exploitative and racist and degrading of other people and making weapons of destruction and death and polluting the world and doing the kind of thing. People who destroy the earth and enslave other people and degrade other people and hate other people and rob other people and kill and steal from other people are people who do not have love in them, ladies and gentlemen. And when you have been reared and conditioned by these people, they will condition the love out of you as well. You must understand that. Now then, why do we fear love? Often we're afraid to love as people because if we truly loved one another, we would get angry at what other people do to the people we love. We couldn't stand the mistreatment that is occurring to our people. We would work hard to overthrow those people. It's just like someone who's attacking your child that you love. You can't stand by and see it happen. You remove them and destroy them before you see them destroy someone you love. If you love your own people, and if African people love themselves deeply, they could not stand around and see themselves be exploited by another people and abused by another people. You cannot stand the idea that your children will be raised to be exploited and destroyed by another people. It is impossible for you to think. But then, if you've also been trained to think that the white man is all-powerful, that he is invincible, that you need his love to feel right, yes, that you cannot live without his love, then you are going to fear hating him deeply. Which means that often what will happen, in order for you not to feel the hatred for the white man for what he's doing to you, and of course the hatred that will make you destroy him for what he is doing to your loved ones, the dilemma is often solved by reducing your love for yourself and reducing your love for your own as a way of handling your own emotions. And therefore you become afraid to love your own too deeply, because that deep love then has with it the possibility that you will suffer from annihilation when you confront the people that are destroying the people that you love. So consequently, many of us then have backed off the deep kind of love because of fear of that love and what will happen to us if we truly love deeply. And also because if we have a love for the other people, if we feel the loss of their love, and if the only way we can rid the world of the destruction that is happening to us is if we rid the world of them, then we have a stake in their staying alive and of saving them. And consequently then we get caught in a dilemma. We can't afford to love our own people too deeply, and we can't afford to hate the other people too much. As a matter of fact, we cover up our hatred with a love for them that we don't have to show for our own. And we conceal and repress what should be our natural rage against these people by pretending to love them. We go into what we call a reaction formation, where you behave in the very opposite way of how you really feel, because you're afraid that if you reveal your true feelings, then something terrible may happen to you. So when you get a people in that dilemma, their abilities to love and form affectionate relationships one to the other becomes problematic. And it creates a problem and maintains the kind of situation that you see us in today. Okay then. The last one that's mentioned here is productivity. Well-adjusted people are able to channel their abilities into productive activity. They are enthusiastic about life and do not need to drive themselves to meet the demands of the day. A chronic lack of energy and excessive susceptibility to fatigue are often symptoms of psychological tension resulting from unresolved problems. I just find it so interesting how these people can write this material here on a certain level and yet set it up in such a way that it doesn't work for anybody. You know, and that's the interesting thing about it. And our people will read this, memorize it, pass exams on it, and miss the whole point of the thing, because we've been set up to do that. You see, I've been pushed out of my own institution. Why? In part because I try to move these concepts into a higher plane. This is the reason why I told my students, if you learn this material in the Afrocentric way, you will not only know what the white boy knows, you will know more than the white boy knows. A true black studies course will make your mind broader and deeper than the standard. The white man cannot offer you the deepest and the best education. You can only offer yourself the deepest and the best education. And when I talk about this then, productivity, well-adjusted people. Now, often then the student is left with this as an individual concept. But then let us look at our people. Where is the productivity? What we see is a people who are consumerist in nature. All over the world, our countries, buying, begging, borrowing, consuming, trying to buy prestige, trying to be loved by buying, trying to distinguish themselves by buying, by consuming, not production. You will not be able to consume yourselves into equality, ladies and gentlemen. Japan does not consume itself. One of the problems we're having with Japan today is what? They won't buy anything from America. But what are they doing? They're selling everything to Americans. And what are the Americans complaining about? We're losing jobs. We're losing factories. We can't afford to continue this. If we continue to buy from the Japanese and the Chinese and the Koreans and the other people of the world, after a while then we will not be able to supply our people with jobs and with the necessary things for living. And this is the problem that's going on. We're into it now. Harley-Davidson, the motorcycle manufacturer, is only existing today because the United States has decided to protect those workers against Japanese competition. And you'll find that in many other industries. Jobs are being literally shipped out of this country to other nations. To the point there where you hear in Congress, and the president just vetoed a bill last week, where the congressmen now are literally just want to tell the other nation to keep their products out of this country. Where we imposed on Japan a so-called voluntary restraint on the number of cars it sold in this country so that people could work in this nation. Now, what does it mean to you as a consumer? It means on a certain level with you as a consumer that you are really giving welfare to the workers of this country. Because you see, if a Japanese motorcycle can come over here and be sold for $400 or $500 less than an American-made motorcycle, if you let those motorcycles get into the country, it would run the American motorcycle companies out of business. So what the government does is to charge the Japanese an import fee of $400 so that the prices could be equal. Which means that you as a consumer then, when you buy that Japanese motorcycle, in a sense you're giving those workers at the American company $400 to keep a job. You see, welfare can go in many devious ways, ladies and gentlemen, many peculiar kind of ways. And what I'm trying to say then, and what this country is recognizing, is that you don't make it in the world and you don't maintain power in the world through consumption. You maintain power in the world through production. And when we must recognize, when we look over our African nations and our Caribbean nations, and we look at ourselves within this very country itself, what we see is a bunch of consumers who think that they can consume themselves into power and can consume themselves into equality with the European. It's not going to happen. As I've often said, the man that drives the Cadillac is not equal to the man who can make it and drive it. And the fact that you think you can drive these cars and your African nations are not making them, driving is not equality. And we must face that fact. But people who are concerned more with being accepted by their masters, who are concerned with identifying with their masters, who feel that they can't love themselves until they are loved by their masters, who are wrestling with their fears of love and hatred, who are wrestling with their inefficient perceptions of reality, people who do not know themselves, people who are overrun with impulsive and compulsive behavior because they do not have control over their behavior, are people who are not going to be productive. They are going to be so caught up, wrestling with their conflicts, wrestling with the contradictions in their personality, until they are going to be tired most of the time. They're not going to have enough energy. They're going to be people who are lazy because they're filled with anger and resentment. And people then who just don't have the stamina and the energy to do what's necessary to be done. And there are people who look around then for grants and dependency handouts and other kinds of things. So therefore then we can see with these things in mind why the condition exists among our people that exists today. And I'll wrap it up here. If then we are to achieve a psychology of liberation, I think our analysis today makes it obvious what we must do. First of all, of course, it indicates then that we must deal with reality. And we must have our own means of determining what reality is. And we must confront that reality no matter how painful it may be to us as people. We cannot be liberated unless we are liberated from a false reality. We must know ourselves and how we have been created, how we are maintained psychologically in the condition that we are in. And we must then develop the techniques necessary to break this control. We must strive then for control over our behavior, which means that we must have control over our turf and over our territory and over the conditions under which we live. You can talk about this citizenship nonsense all day and all night. You can talk about how these Koreans have a right to be in your community. But while you're talking about that, you should talk about how you have a right to own your own community too as a people. You can talk about in Africa how these Indians over there are so-called citizens too, and how these Muslims and Arabs are citizens too. But you must also talk about how the African must have control of their own nations. And you must not bury your control behind some namby-pamby bullshit about citizenship. Because ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, you must have control of the conditions under which you live as a people. And you're going to let these Jesse Jackson leaders and these other kind of leaders talk to you about this nonsense of loving and this other stuff, and you're going to find yourself never being in control of yourself as a people and under the control of other people. One of the best ways to get them to love you is to put them in a position where they don't have any control over you. And then, as a matter of fact, and the other thing is, ultimately, is what? You don't give a damn whether they love you or not. And it is only when you escape giving a damn about these people loving you and accepting you that you escape their control over you as a people. Self-esteem and acceptance certainly means then that we have to reconstruct our image as a people and our own ways of measuring ourselves. Certainly it means then that we have to teach ourselves to love each other, as a great deal of love is taught and a great deal of loving is taught. It means then that we can begin to teach ourselves how to love and teach ourselves loving. Isn't it amazing, though, that ultimately, as I tell my class often, You're going to learn this mathematics, and you're going to learn all of this other stuff, and you're going to find out that the real important thing in your life is having a good man or a woman to come home to, and a good set of children, and a good family, and a good community to live in, and good friends and people who surround you. And you're going to find that without these things, despite your money, despite your job and your prestige, life is just not going to work out for you. I said, but isn't it sort of strange that even though love is going to be the foundation of the salvation of man, you go through a whole college career and you're taught nothing about it. You're not taught how to love, how to make love, how to express love and feelings. That's not seen as the center of your curriculum. The only thing that's seen as the center of your curriculum is slave labor, teaching you how to slave and punch keys and do things for other people. And can't you begin to see then how fundamentally different an Afrocentric education is? Because in the center of that education is loving and knowing how to love and how to relate to other people. And everything else is of secondary importance. Let's understand that. You see, Freud saw the basis of civilization as being the sublimation and the repression of sex. Yeah. In other words, if you let people screw as much as they want to, they won't come to work on Monday. You know, you have some people, they feel if they really make love real deep, that's all they'll think about. If I let myself go, I'll become a hoe, and that's all I'll do. It's not true. It's not true. If you truly let yourself go and truly and deeply enjoy lovemaking, you'll have time to do other things. You'll have the energy and the sense of security and the sense of well-being to do other things. If you can't get no satisfaction, your mind is caught up continuously and diverted. And your life then becomes twisted and perverted, you see. And so it is the true satisfaction of love and loving that creates a real civilization. And a civilization then that sees sex as its enemy, that sees loving as its enemy, has to be anti-life, ladies and gentlemen, because life flows out of sexuality and flows out of loving. And any educational system then where love and loving and sexuality and hugging and kissing and being with other people in the sense of love, where that is seen as a sideline and is not a part of the essential development of a child, is an educational system that prepares people to create death and to bring about death and destruction. And this is the civilization that we see today. Because, ladies and gentlemen, when you truly love and when you love deeply, you'll find out that many of the things you think are important in life are not important at all. Not important at all. That the ability to have really wonderful people with whom you can be honest, with whom you can really share, people who are not afraid to be intimate and express themselves, people who know themselves and can feel themselves, you will find that you need far less of these substitutes for love that we have today. These objects and these houses and all of these other kinds of things that people create for themselves in the place of real love and in the place of their fears, to represent their fears. So consequently then, and you see that in the older African system, loving and how to love is taught. They didn't need to develop this monstrosity of a culture in order to feel whole as a people. You call it primitive. I call it the people who learn that good feelings and happiness can be gained on another plane other than with objects and toys and the other kinds of things we substitute for real human emotions. And consequently then, we will teach love. And consequently, we will begin to be productive And we will produce a new kind of world and a new world order. We are going to produce a world that is one that has nothing to do with the European. Let me say this, you see, about the person, let me put it this way. You know, when a person curses you out, you can respond to it in several ways. Now, some people respond to it by saying, take those words back. I'm not going to let you rest until you take those words back. Now, what has happened under that in that situation? The very anger of the individual has attached them to the other person. In a sense, they have fallen under hypnosis at that moment. Why is this? Because now you're going to live and nurse that resentment. It now has become a part of your personality. You're going to even begin to live your life and world built around that resentment and that feeling. You're not going to rest until they take it back, because you feel bad as long as they don't take it back. And so consequently, in a sense, the person now has gained a hold over you that they themselves can only release. So what am I trying to say here then? Often the person who is degraded by another individual becomes attached to the degrader, because the degrading individual has created in them now a complex. And here what I'm trying to get at here then is, what does the African do? The white man has blasphemed you. He's degraded you. He's made us feel bad as a people. And we're determined that until he takes his words back, we're not going to rest. And we're caught up in that. Many of our historians are writing history trying to prove to the white man, we're real humans too. They write it for that reason. And many of us are still out here trying to prove to those other people who and what we are. And what do we mean then? So until we can forget about getting these people to take their word back, let it go, we will be forever enslaved to them as a people. And it means then that the kind of world we want to build should have nothing to do with white people being in the world at all. It should be a world that we want to exist whether white people ever existed in the world. Because as long as it is a world that is connected to their existence, it is controlled by their existence. Because as soon as they change, we change. And the world we want to build then is a world that is superior to the one that we have here today, and one that is determined by we ourselves as people. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you, Father.
Thank you.
All right. Any comments or questions? Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right, go ahead. Mr. Wilson.
Yes.
You speak of creating a new order
Mm-hmm.
for black people.
Yes.
Now, is that order to be created here or somewhere else?
It's to be created here and somewhere else, in the sense that it should be a Pan-Africanist system, and it should be created in cooperation with people from all over the African world, or representative people there as well. So in that sense, while it may start here, it may start somewhere else, but the ultimate thing is that it represents a somewhat worldwide phenomenon, because I think this is about the only way we're going to be able to overcome the system that confronts us today. What that is exactly, I'm not prepared to say, because I think it's something that we all should contribute to, and it's not necessarily something that one person or maybe just one organization will impose upon other people, but something that should be worked out and developed very practically. Mm-hmm.
Dr. Wilson,
Yes.
you helped me to clarify and focus a lot of my thinking,
Thank you.
I was a student at Queens College, during, the late 60s period, early 70s. And Queens College program at sea, to me, was an attempt to break, to rupture that implanted mind, as you say, that created mind, that implanted personality.
Right.
In the sense of a lot of the things that were happening in the program. For example, I was involved in the program, was a member of the overall personnel and budget committee of C. Okay, and this is something new and something that was quite different. And but as I began to reflect back, it happened within the context of hostile environment. We were trying to create a new type of educational system, a new type of educational environment. But, it's basically failed. I went back, I've seen the SEEK program now as a shell of what it used to be at Queens College. There's a lot of Eastern Europeans there, a lot of, people from, all over the world. But very few, the proportion of African Americans, has dropped dramatically.
Yeah.
That was the overwhelming number was African American at that particular time. And in light of the Black Studies programs that are being decimated, you hear about
Yes.
things that are going on now. I want to know whether we can create, this new type of mind. Destroy this implanted mind and create a mind who is in control of itself.
Yes.
Within this in context, we have to create, institutions. We already have institutions like, Morehouse, but
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether it's still, really under our control.
No, it's not. Of course, it never has been, frankly, speaking. Even though we've had the black colleges, and of course they've served some very good functions, and certainly being a product of them, I appreciate them very much. And of course, they still were not under our control, but in certain other ways, the day-to-day control that I saw that was very important as a student there, and the kind of models I saw there were very important. And also in certain instances, education, that's what we call a subversive activity, occurred there. In other words, often we don't necessarily all the time need control from the top down, because often it's the teacher in that classroom that is really the important person. I think in New York City education, for instance, we put too much emphasis on who would be the chancellor instead of who will really teach our children within the classroom itself. Because when you have those children in that classroom, you can do a lot of things with them that while appearing sometimes even to follow the standard outline, which is what I do in my own teaching. As you can see today, when I took what was a part of a standard textbook to still turn it and create something out of it for us. So in that sense, even though the black schools were not under direct control, and of course many of the other schools we deal with are not under direct control, with a consciousness among our teachers, we can still help to bring about some changes. Of course, obviously, a lot of our education has got to take place outside of the college and outside of the university. We can do it. It's not that we can't afford to do it, but it's whether we have the will to do it and the organization to do it or not. To a good extent, too, a good deal of the change can occur within the standard school structure. Because a major problem we have with many of our people is really an impairment, deliberately and politically, of their cognitive skills. Just pure thinking, pure logical reasoning, the pure ability to listen well, the pure ability to observe well, the ability to see through abstractions, the ability to deal with words and word implications. Now those kinds of abilities, if they were developed strongly enough, can often then prepare an individual to see reality and to deal with it and to analyze it. And to a good extent, while emphasizing that kind of training, we can prepare our students, even under the standard systems, to at least get their minds open to seeing what is going on and observing and reasoning and analyzing what is going on as such. Ultimately, though, we would have to found our own institutions. Generally, though, I think we should found them in such a way that at least those people who are responsible for teaching the leaders of our people will have received the correct education, you see, so that we don't have to get bogged down in trying to educate every student that comes through the college and every person that's in school, because that becomes an impossible task. But we should make sure that those people who are in the leadership positions are correctly educated and correctly perceive reality, so that when they lead the people, then their leadership can be one of leading people in terms of that reality. And it should mean then that the people who we choose to lead us should be people we have educated as a people and who have been through some training under our auspices rather than through the auspices of other people, you see. So I think in this way we can sort of deal with the situation that confronts us as a people today. Yes, sir.
I want to raise three questions with you very, very quickly. The first one has to do with the development of the struggle in Southern Africa. I was talking last week to some people at City College who were conducting an emergency meeting on South Africa. And I raised the question concerning the liberation of Southern Africa and the fact that they seem to be talking in terms of a non-racial Southern Africa, which means, of course, that white people would be allowed to stay and to, I guess, to some extent achieve power in Southern Africa. And then I raised the other question of the fact that if Southern Africa retains the name South Africa, it would be that for the first time in history, we have what is called a white South Africa. In other words, giving more legitimacy to something that they created in the first place. So sometimes I wonder if in fact the name South Africa being created by them, the white people, the white settlers, was not in fact a kind of way of just making themselves become African to some extent. And I see that the ANC and the liberators would have, after they take control, give legitimacy to this interpretation. Now that's one of the questions. I want you to deal with that. The other thing is, you mentioned about material wealth as a substitute for love. And I'm saying that in a way, really, we have to acquire material wealth and control the material wealth in order to have power. So, I mean, how do you do some clarification on that point? The other thing is, I saw some couple of white guys here tonight, and I don't want to put the poetry theater on the spot, but with their consent, of course, I raised the question of should we be discussing our liberation in the presence of our enemies? And the discussing the fact that they are here means that we preoccupy ourselves with their presence.
Okay, then. Certainly, I won't consume a lot of time with the with the issue here. But one of the things we have to watch in your first question there, the statement, is there's a standard issue always of neocolonialism, which is what you're dealing with when you talk about that issue of South Africa. And it's the same old issue of what is independence and what does African independence really mean. And I think you're going to, and you're faced with the same problem, that right now people are fighting for the independence of South Africa with many different definitions of what that independence is going to represent. And I think sometimes it may even be deliberate, because at this point, some people don't want us to talk about the nature of that independence for fear that it might interrupt the struggle, particularly those who might talk about independence in terms of a fully nationalistic sense. The idea being that the African is going to take over the economic as well as the political system there, and added on top of that, we'll put into being a sort of socialistic or communalistic system there. Now, some people feel if you start talking about it in those terms, you're going to lose many rights.
Right.
And therefore, and for those people who feel that having rights as a part of the struggle is necessary to win, then they want to downplay this kind of thing or leave the issue open and sort of ambiguous. And so consequently, I think there has been almost a deliberate avoidance of discussing what you're talking about because of this particular issue. We get caught too as a people often because we don't struggle so much for independence and total control as we do sometimes for equality and for so-called integration. And what often happens then is when we do get independence, we are caught up in the contradiction of our own philosophy, such that we cannot justify the pushing out of other people, because then we would be contradicting ourselves. It's the same kind of contradiction you face in Harlem when we look at the Asian over there. And on one hand, if we say we push them out, we then feel bad because it looks as if we are practicing racial discrimination. And it then looks as if we are being contradictory. How can we fight against racial discrimination when we turn right around and practice it right again in Harlem? So what it in effect does is paralyze the leadership in Harlem in such a way that they can't make any moves against it, you see. And that's the reason why I believe in nationalistic leadership from the beginning. So that when you do move into control, you're not contradicted in terms of what you're doing, because it's been obvious where you're going from the very beginning. And it is this lack of clear nationalism, I think, on some people's part over there that's going to create a problem in South Africa. And of course, some people will consider it a tactical maneuver. You know, we get this, and then after we get this, we make a determination. But it's a very complex issue. For myself, I wish that the black African peoples could fight that battle by themselves and push these people out by ourselves without the need for the intervention of these Europeans and without the need for probably what's going to happen, a so-called negotiated independence, which by its very negotiation is going to structure those whites right into the system itself. And my feeling is that we're going to be left with that. besides the fact of, whether the preparedness, educational, and all the other kind of issues that hook into it. When I talk about materialism, I was talking about materialism as a substitute for love. It doesn't mean, of course, that one is not involved with materials and it's not involved with economic development and so forth. And that necessarily the economic development and materialistic development is anonymical or antithetical to love and the expression of love. The thing that I'm referring to, though, was the replacing of love by materialistic things, using materialistic things as a substitute, cars and televisions and other kind of things, as a substitute for real human feelings and real human relations. And I think a part of the dilemma, and I think the advance of the Afrocentric culture is its ability to be able to balance a strong material growth and development and economic growth and development without against a real emotional, feeling, spiritual development as well. And I think we can do it. You see, we can do it because, unlike the white man, we're going to use both sides of our head. You see, instead of just being left-brained, the thing that we're going to bring to the world is that balance of left and right brain, to the extent where we will know how to develop ourselves scientifically, technologically, and yet at the same time not be controlled and overrun by that technology to the degree that we lose our spirit and we lose our soul. That is why I mentioned earlier that in an Afrocentric educational system, at the center of that center, while you're learning all the math and the engineering and the other stuff, you are going to also learn about love and loving. And that will be at the center. And these other things will be seen as serving that particular purpose as such. That, though, is something we're going to have to work out, but I think it can be done because we've been given the brain to do it. The problem with the European is that he's gone all left, that is technological, and the problem with many of us as Africans, we've gone all right almost, completely hung up in emotions and feelings and left the technical alone. But we must recognize that the Creator has given us two brains, which means then that it is possible for those two brains to operate harmoniously together. In a sense then, instead of having a unimodal, that is one brain kind of society, we're going to have a bimodal or trimodal society where both of the brains will work together in unity. This will be the major contribution of an Afrocentric system. That is, bringing balance back into the world itself. It's going to be people like yourself who are going to do the writing and the work and things like this that will help us find our direction in this matter. The other thing about the white ones, you'll have to speak to the other gentleman. I'm not going to speak to that part.
No, I think you should, and I would like you to speak freely because you come back here again. So please, freely on that issue.
Well, I couldn't speak to it because I really don't know the policy, so what the policy issue is here, which you would have to explain yourself. Obviously, from my own personal point of view, I prefer not to speak to mixed audiences, particularly at this particular time, because it does divert attention away. And for some people, it has a dampening effect upon their enthusiasm and upon our honesty. Because quite often, when we get these mixed audiences, many times some people do not want to be honest and straightforward, and they don't want to sort of tell it like it is, and consequently, it sometimes falsifies the group relationship. And so in that regard, I think there are times that we should have our own privacy so that we can talk very directly to other people without being concerned, to ourselves, without being concerned as to how other people are reacting to it. and also without being concerned about exactly what is going to be done with the information that is put forth here. We as people definitely need forums where we and we alone are present in those forums. I think one of the reasons, as I'm writing a book now on psychotherapy, I think one of the reasons we have difficulty in trying to transform many people in the prisons and many people in the mental hospitals and other places is because of the presence of white social workers and the presence of white psychologists and psychiatrists. Because often, in order to straighten our people out, we need a very honest and straightforward discussion of the political, social systems, and a very honest and straightforward expression of emotions and feelings. And this cannot be accomplished when you have mixed audiences and mixed therapists around. I think one of the values, one of the things that made Elijah Muhammad's group effective was the fact that they had their people to themselves. And I think that's a very first requirement when you're really concerned about transforming your people, and that is to have your people to yourself. Just as the transformation of our children means that at least for a period of time, we should have them exclusively to ourselves so that we can deal with them in the terms that they should be dealt with for our future liberation. Yes.
Last time I heard you speak, I spoke to you in NJIT, I left some material with you based on the Global 2000 program, World Genocide, started a Carter program. Could you speak a little on that? Also, will you be publishing anything new in our book program?
Yes. In terms of which program?
In terms of study classes, etc.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Frankly speaking, I can't speak to the Global 2000. That's on my reading list, okay, because it's been around for quite a while. And it's just one of the materials I haven't had a chance to really get to reading, even though it's been on my list for quite some time now. But quickly, can you tell me what it proposes? I've heard something about it.
It's based on, it's been going on for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. It started with Carter's program.
Yeah.
The initial, to my understanding, the initial head man was the guy Haig.
Alexander Haig.
Alexander Haig. Mm-hmm. But the concept really is based on the elimination of all third world people. Mm-hmm. Confiscate all resources. 2 billion, even more if possible. Mm-hmm. A population reduction, the idea that the population needs to be reduced by at least 2 billion people. Matter of fact, China is a prime example of carrying that status out. Ethiopia, Latin America, etc.
Based on the idea that the world is overcrowded and that we cannot continue to have unchecked growth of populations, and therefore by 2000 or whatever, we must seek to reduce the world population by a certain number of people. Yeah, a very standard argument that you have there. And it's one we hear, as you say, one that is often dressed up under the guise of birth control. And it's the idea, in part, that the world suffers from overpopulation. And also it's based on the assumption of many people that the problems that our people face is due to the fact that we are having too many children, which is a very interesting concept. And you see it operating in this country. The statement is often made, that we are poor because we have children. We have too many children. But the problem with that is we often note that the more money people make, the fewer children they have, you see. And so there almost seems to be a built-in birth control mechanism there that says with increased prosperity goes decreased population. So when a society, in a sense, makes that proposal by saying you're poor because you have too many children, it sort of smacks of genocide. Because in a sense, what it seems to be implying is we are not going to see that you prosper, you see, as a way of reducing your population, since that's the problem. What we're going to ask you to do is to kill your children as a way of so-called increasing prosperity. But of course, while you're increasing prosperity, you're dying. You see, if the prosperity even is going to be increased under those circumstances. So what you see there is really sometimes a disguised way of reducing a population hidden behind what appears to be a moral or an economically or socially justifiable reason. Now, we will recognize, and even Sowell argues this, Thomas Sowell argues this, that the major problem with many parts of Africa is not overpopulation, but underpopulation. And that many of the wealthiest parts of the world today are exceedingly crowded. And you know, you look at places like Singapore, Hong Kong, and other places, and when you compare their person per square mile statistics, it would seem to belie the idea then that population is the problem as to the reason for these people being poor or the reasons that they're facing the problems they are. What it seems to imply then is that the people who are in control of the world economic system are determined not to reorient that system, and the price for them not reorienting that system is that some people die in the world. And as you say, it's been going on for a long time, and it is going to continue to go on. I think that we as a people face the possibility of extinction in general. And that's one of the reasons why I find it very, very important that we develop true power to be able to defend ourselves against the extinction. And while it may not come in the form of Global 2000, I believe it definitely will come in other forms. We see it in disease, we see it in starvation, we see it in the breakdowns of African societies and things like this. We see it in the advance of the space race and things like this. And I think we're facing this, so forth. I am coming out with a new publication probably the latter part of the summer, which deals with what I call an Afrocentric therapeutic psychology, dealing with many of the concepts I mentioned here today, that goes into detail about the creation of the African personality, and will propose a means by which the personality can be recreated and self-created in the future.
One more. Also, will you be conducting any more classes like you did?
I will be doing it in February, and I will be sending out the leaflets. In fact, I'll continue the course I began in November, where in February I'll be going into, in specific terms, brainwashing, and how the slave system was used as a brainwashing instrument. And then I work from there into mass hypnosis, and how our people are maintained in a state of hypnosis and are manipulated. And from there, then I will go into counter brainwashing, how then we can re-brainwash ourselves so as to counter the control that these people have over us today. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, first of all, I just want to say it's really good to see you.
Thank you.
It's really good to experience part of your thinking process.
Thank you very much.
Really good. What I wanted to say is that last night I was in a discussion with my sister and my mother, who had just come from Alabama. And my sister, she's been saying this for the last 20 years, but when she said it last night, I realized she was a lot more serious than she'd been before. She said, you know, you're getting ready to have a nervous breakdown. You're getting ready to have a nervous breakdown. And I was wondering why, you know, I was sort of beginning to sort of wonder why she said that, and why she would say that and really meant it. I think she meant it to herself a lot more than she meant it before. When I'm at the point in terms of my own development that I'm feeling good about where I feel that I'm going, where I feel that I'm moving to. And so when I thought about why she feels this is because some of the things in which I've moved to recently. And I think some of the things that you were talking about today really made this very clear to me. So I'm coming to a question. At least to a thing that I want to elaborate on. Okay. One of the things that I've decided recently is that it is important for me personally to begin to, well, I decided to leave my job that I have, which is a very comfortable job to everyone else, making a lot of money, and to really begin to work inside of a community, doing something to build a community. So I've said I've begun to say to people that the job does not prepare us to build the community, controls the community. Our job does not do that.
No.
Okay. And that so I've decided not to no longer at a certain point, the skills that I've gotten, I was going to take them to do something inside of the community. So that sounds real crazy.
Yes. Of course.
Okay. But another thing that I was going to say, I've said, I'm really good at what I do. Really good at what I do. And that sounds really crazy.
Yes. We expect you to have a little false modesty there. Yeah. Well, as a part of the thing that I referred to earlier is what I call the reverse, which is the standard thing that we have to look at, that if we say that this world is run by lies, and it is, and lies are essentially a reversal of the truth, then our minds as people must be reversed. And so consequently, what is crazy must be seen as normal. You see, and this is what I was alluding to earlier about the fact that it's going to be the well-educated, the pillars of the community and that business who will end up bringing death and destruction to the world, and that it is the so-called normal European, the normal educated individual that essentially is going to create the problem, and that the thing that we have to recognize as people, that it is the normal European and the normal way the system is run that is really crazy. And my point being, it is crazy because we can see the end point of it. With so many people homeless, so many people starving, so many people needlessly kept out of jobs, so many people excessively wealthy, while so many other people are excessively poor. So the war and the destruction and all of these other things I alluded to indicates then that these so-called normal people are not normal. But they have to convince other people that they are. So consequently, when you behave in a way different from what they consider normal, then that, of course, is called crazy. And you would be expected to be branded as crazy for thinking differently. A part of the maintaining of our people in oppression is to make us think that anytime we do not fit in the place that the world has for us and fit within the definition that the European has made for us, we are crazy and we are out of our minds. And so and I said earlier that often then our own families and people have to become the agents for this kind of concept. So what you're seeing is this being demonstrated. Our families and members of our families who are caught up in there, members of my own family in the same way, who are caught up in the other values of the system, are going to see you as out of your mind, because the mind that they have is the only mind they could possibly conceive of as being the right mind, you see. So you would expect that kind of thing. I will congratulate you on your courage and what you're doing, because it's going to take quite a bit of it. And of course, hope you much success, particularly
in the ability to take what you know and turn it into something that works for the community, but also that works for you as a person. You should, if you can take your talents and they earn you a decent living, and we deserve a decent living. There are some of us who think we should be dirt poor when we're working for the people, But you should earn a decent living. And of course, the important thing is to earn, and for all of us as people, is to learn that we can earn a decent living while working for ourselves. You see, and this has been part of the game that's run on us, that we cannot work for ourselves and live well, but we can. So good luck to you on that, and I think we can. And the thing you said about the fact that we're educated not to work for ourselves is very, very, very true. Because in a system that depends upon our working for it, certainly we have to be trained to think this way. The best of luck to you there. Yes, sir.
Yes, I wanted to know if you could comment on the political implications of Alice Walker's book, Purple, and also the recent production of the film.
Yeah, well, I'm going to talk as a prejudiced individual here, meaning an individual who has not read the book or seen the movie. Okay, so my ignorance will probably be very apparent, but that's not going to prevent me from talking for a minute. I've been very concerned in general about the literary situation that confronts our people. Frankly speaking, I am probably more interested personally in the writing of fiction. But somehow I got into the writing of nonfiction because of my teaching activities. I'm still looking forward to going back to writing novels and science fiction and other kinds of things. I have a couple of uncompleted plays that I want to bring to a close. And I'm saying that to indicate that my interest in literature and so-called fiction and writing, it goes beyond just my work in terms of the psychology of the black child and some related areas. And so consequently, I'm very concerned about what is happening in literature. And one of the things that concerns me is the projection, and I know this is going to get some people, of the black female writer and the relative non-existence, or at least lack of publicity about black male writers. And that has concerned me. And one of the questions I have not answered sufficiently, but has been in my mind, is why is this happening at this point? Where you can name 4 or 5 female writers, and other than maybe James Baldwin, or if you're really into literature, you can pull out a couple other people, you're not really hearing about black male writers. And I wonder to a degree, is it because these female writers are writing a different kind of literature? I'm also wondering, and it makes me wonder too, about the idea that if white people like it and are buying it and making it a bestseller, it makes me wonder very much what that literature is talking about. And it makes me think then that what is being produced is the kind of literature that whites can read and be comfortable with. And I'm wondering if it's not a family type of literature that's coming out here that's beginning to concentrate in the black family in such a way that you can end up blaming what happens to black people on the family itself, and therefore relieves this white reading audience of the sense of guilt and the other kinds of things they would have, where you could write a novel that dealt with them and how they created the black family and destroyed the black family in and of itself. And so I'm wondering about that as well. I saw the play, A Soldier's Play, which was very popular. And when I saw that play, one of the things I noticed about it was it sort of took those people off the hook. They could come out of that play not feeling guilty. And you can look then at that problem that play dealt with as a black problem, a black personality problem, when in a sense it is a play about racism and how racism has inculcated itself and implanted itself in the minds of those people in such a way that they'll come out killing each other. However, that is not played up enough and is not made clear enough such that many people can leave that place, whites in particular, can leave it with a sense of enjoyment and not a sense of guilt and a sense of having to look at themselves as they truly should do. If you look at colored girls, again, falling in that category where the play is almost too tightly constructed in the sense of how those men that they're complaining about and the life they're complaining about have been made into what they are. Where some people then can read what went on in that play as a blaming, a play where the woman is blaming men and the black man is blaming the black woman, and therefore the white man escapes again. And so consequently, whites can be comfortable with that kind of play. I got into the Alice Walker controversy the other evening when a female walked into my shop there and she says, incest is very, very, very prevalent in black families. And I said, my goodness, it requires 3 varies? It is that prevalent? I could take vary, but to put 3 of them out there I found quite alarming. And my thing is, she is a psychologist, and my thing was, look, can you produce me some other work that shows this, some statistics or sociological studies or something that can deal with this? Of course, she refused to deal with it in these terms. And what I was getting was she's reading this book, and she's getting the impression from this book and maybe a bit of her personal experience that incest is just running wild in the black family. And my thing with her, then I became a little alarmed with this. I mean, how many other people will read this book and come away with this conclusion that incest now is a standard part of black family life? And I'm not willing and ready to buy that, even though I know there are many women who have been sexually molested by relatives. I've dealt with them, drug addict types, prostitute types, and other types who have been there. But to say that many, many, many are very, very prevalent is I think, sort of overstating the case, at least until we can actually get some real proof of that situation. I ask her again, you're going to tell me that the black family now, you said the father is absent in over half of the families, and then you're going to tell me that these fathers turn riding around raping their daughters. Can you have it both ways? You said the father's not in the home, and then on the other hand now you're telling me that they're in there sleeping with their daughters? I was alarmed then at her willingness to accept this kind of statement. And so I'm concerned then with the political implications of that kind of movie or that kind of thing where people may read into it. Now, I'm not saying this is what Alice Walker put into it, okay? But where people might read into it something about the black family that is not there. The other thing I'm concerned with, of course, is the portrayal of the black male again. No good black father, no good husband. I can even deal with that, because many of our fathers are no good and many of the husbands are no good. All right? But let's look at the solution. What was the solution to the problem? Going to bed with the woman? Engaging in lesbian activities? Where is the good black man who will come and rescue her after she's gone through those trials? There's nothing there. So what you have here is a lack of balance. You see, a solution that's very peculiar, or a way of reacting to a situation that's very peculiar there, that ultimately is not going to solve the black family problem. We're not going to solve the black family problem by women sleeping with other women, you see. And the idea of leaving the black male then with the images that were left in there, I think adds to the kind of poor image that we have. And of course, other people are responding to Spielberg's direction. I think that, of course, is also another issue. But I think a deeper issue is where we as people don't even have our own theater. and we're not in control of our own movie production. And why we think that it is necessary for us to integrate into these people's theater productions and into their movie making. We have over 30 million black people in this country. That's enough to make a whole nation of people. We at one time had black theaters here and black movies. I'm not coming necessarily on the quality, but it indicates that we have enough people in this country to support a black theater industry. We have enough black people in Africa to support a black theater interest, enough people in the Caribbean to support black movies. And the thing that troubles me then is not only are we letting whites direct movies, but the fact is we are not striving toward a real indigenous That wasn't enough. He comes back again to do it to us again. And in fact, I almost had to congratulate Gorbachev for not being nasty, as he could have been. You know, here you are over here talking about some Jews in Soviet Russia, and your people are catching hell in America. And you're out here representing Jews and talking about Jews, you know. And the fact that he didn't say that, I think he has to give him a little plus on that, you know. Because I tell you, I would have been tempted if I were in his shoes to say that. Who are you to represent a people who themselves, and on top of that, who themselves have repudiated you? And who, even after you do this, are still not going to accept you as a people and as a person. And to place yourself before this, me, and to come before me with this kind of thing, would indicate, you know, the height of asininity as a person. And to then not even deal with, I could have gone with him dealing with the craziness of nuclear war and getting across the fact that what Gorbachev was in and what Reagan was in was pure, outright insanity and madness. Okay, and that should be pointed out to them, and that should have been the focus. And of course, representing the interests of African people. The fact that he spoke to the interests of Jewish people would indicate to me that he is wrong-headed and misled, and is definitely not going in a position to lead our own people in this regard. The Jewish press, even after he did this kind of thing, just as after he made that speech with the Democratic Convention, still did not respond to any great extent with open arms to Jackson. Because ultimately, he doesn't realize, I don't think, that it's not in the interest of these people to have him really attain any position of leadership and real influence in this nation as such. But he still somehow, from what I can gather, is living with that false hope that somehow he's going to become international. This sort of disturbs me too often about a trend I see in some black leaders now, and I've seen in the past as well. They gain a good deal of notoriety and a good deal of respect speaking out for the black cause, particularly in America and in Africa, and speaking out for the African causes in general. And then somehow, when it looks like they're in the best position to really become more effective for our people in America and in the African nations, they all of a sudden want to speak for everybody. And they all of a sudden want to become international leaders representing every stripe and color of people, to the extent where they sort of dissipate their whole meaning as a leader. In a sense, he becomes then not a leader of black people, but some kind of other leader, which is hard to describe. It's sort of like the program the young man alluded to about Sikh, and how at first that program starts out as a black program, and black becomes the only minority, and then after a while, you start throwing in the other people. So after a while now, minority has no meaning whatsoever in this country, because women are in on it, the Jews are in on it,
Asians are in on it and everybody's in on it, so it doesn't matter anymore. So a leader now gives up his people in order to lead some amorphous group of people, which means ultimately that his original people remain unled. Frankly speaking, I'm a little disturbed about that even in Farrakhan. When I went to that last speech, when I was at the Madison Square Garden, when he said he was going to enter into phase 2. And I thought he was getting ready to talk about his economic program. And he started entering into the idea of going all over the world and, getting into this whole internationalism, dealing with other groups. And I think I have a problem with that. And that problem is that I think many other groups across the world really have very little to gain by identifying right now with American blacks. That is, getting identified with American blacks, particularly when they are in a dependent relationship with whites, is not going to happen. Because their little aid and whatever else they're caught up into with this American white man is going to be threatened by their over-identification. And I think at this point, the major thing is to deal with African people and try to solve and work with our problems first. Now then, on the other hand, Farrakhan obviously is going to be vilified because Farrakhan represents, if his leadership follows a logical path and follows through to a logical conclusion, it really represents the end of the European on this earth. And it represents the destruction of European power. And in a sense, quite justifiably speaking from their point of view, they are alarmed by that. As we said before, remember, these people are a minority in the world. And remember, if the so-called third world actually gained full control over their economic resources and over the economic systems, the European will suffer a great deal as a result of that. So consequently then, a person like Farrakhan and other people in that vein who look like they might succeed in getting us to get real control over our economic, social, and political system is going to be damned by these people and vilified and made to be degraded as a means of destroying their leadership and their influence in the world together. And so this is, of course, what you're seeing is happening to Farrakhan. Ultimately, if there's a choice, the European will embrace the Jesse Jackson leadership because that leadership saves them. I've often said, you see, the European wants it both ways. In the sense that if they can keep their foot on your neck and get away with it, they'll do that. When they see, though, that they can no longer keep their foot on your neck, all of a sudden they want to become brothers. They will become egalitarian. They will become socialistic in their nature. And you can see what happens there then. After they can no longer rape and rob you at will, then all of a sudden they're going to become integrated with you, which means that they continue to eat no matter what happens. And this is, in a sense, what the brother was alluding to in South Africa, you see. And this is why often the black socialist is caught up in a thing too. Because it is through the black socialist that the European, after he loses control of the world, still expects to survive and eat well, because he's sure we are going to, in our great socialist brotherhood in the sky, see that he does not suffer as a result. So in this sense, he's on both sides of the fence at once. Farrakhan nationalistic leadership says what? This is it for you. But the kind of leadership that Jackson represents says, hey, well, look, you better elect me, because look who you got to deal with if you don't deal with me, you see. And so we see that kind of thing developing under the Jesse Jackson leadership, and as we alluded to earlier, in some of the South African struggles. And in a sense, the United States struggle right now in South Africa is, how can we give these people the appearance of achieving independence and yet at the same time staying in there and having actual control. Mm-hmm. One more and we'll be through. Mm-hmm.
My question was, we need from the base level of economic growth, right?
Yes.
Where can we find financial advice as people, to direct us?
Okay. We're going to have to a good extent, create our own financial advice to a good extent. But also, we've seen it. We've seen it in people like Elijah Muhammad. We've seen it in people like Marcus Garvey. We can even see it in people like Father Divine. And we can see it within certain, there are really organizational structures within the black community that have demonstrated a way of achieving economic development and production. But often what has happened is we have not perceived them in the correct way. For instance, Father Divine, for instance, is seen as a cult leader. And the emphasis is put on his personality and on maybe his religious side. But we haven't looked on the side of what enabled this man to feed, say, 2,000 or 3,000 people during a depression. How was he able to attain property and other kinds of things through his through the church and things that he had? So consequently, we look at his experience as an economic experience, not just as a religious experience. We can see the possibility of some approaches to the economic problems we have today. And of course, studying studying Elijah Muhammad's group, studying Marcus Garvey as a group and their approach to getting monies and to gaining properties and to getting land and so forth would be very instructive as to what we could do as a people in terms of our own economic development. Even teaching courses with us in mind and teaching courses based on the analysis of our position as a people will begin to suggest approaches. We look at the church, for instance, many of us look at the church as a religious institution. I think it would be very profitable if we as black people looked at the church and other religious institutions as financial institutions, because they represent a great deal of wealth. And that wealth can be utilized in the interest of black people. We have an example right here in Queens of the Allen AME Church and how it is used its economic resources to build housing, to build schools, to help reconstruct businesses and other kinds of things. So it's not that we lack answers, it's that we somehow lack organization and people who can put these answers to work. So by using the churches as banks, by using certain other methods, for instance, Ivan Light has a book called Ethnic Enterprises in America. He showed how the Japanese and the Chinese were able, despite the fact of great discrimination against them, to attain great amounts of property, business, and so forth through what we call a revolving credit plan. How instead of trying to go to banks and borrow money, what they would do would come together in what we call in African lingo, susu or isusu fashion. That is where each person contributed a certain amount of money to the pot, which was given to one individual to use to buy property or develop businesses and so forth, and that money revolved around the group, so in a sense the group made loans to itself, you see, as a means of buying property and creating property. So that these people were able to buy land and property without having to pay interest rates and going through banks and being turned down and so forth. So the problem is that we as people have available to us over $230 billion, which is a lot of money. And the problem then becomes, how do we form the correct groups and organizations such that that money can be used to build in the black community itself? We need, and I'm looking as a publisher, for a good economist who can sit down and write out these programs with clarity. We don't need another Sowell and a Walter Williams and
these other people who make excuses and apologize for the system. And we need some people then who've studied black institutions, institutions that have succeeded, and will disseminate this information, and for these writings to become a part of courses teaching economic and social development. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank you, Doc. Thank you, Amos Wilson. And I appreciate, on behalf of the African Poetry Theater and the Black American Association, we thank you for coming here. Those of you who are not on our mailing list,